to transitioning, moving around the building. It gives me a chance to go back. So, and then they come back and have a snack, and then we kind of have a review recap of the day. Sometimes we're doing little noodles, some dancing, some singing at the end of the day, just something to try and get them wrapped up for the day. So that's kind of what our day looks like. A big part, a huge part of their education is their social emotional things, making friendship, kindness, sharing, and you can read them all. It's all being a good human being, like you say. Controlling voice levels is huge. They're not used to having to do that. So we work with a system of zeros, and then we work on whispering and other things. So they have a lot of fun with that, but they are picking that up. So, but overall, learning to love school. If I do one thing right, if Linda and I do something right, it's that when they're done, that their parents can say they really love coming to school. So that's our goal. Our academic goals, again, it's not our the biggest part of our day, but we are trying to have them grow. Our pre-math skills, this is just a small list. There's more that we work on. But we try and get them to count to 30 before they go to kindergarten if they can. Recognize the numbers to 10, making sets to 10, so 10 frogs, or make sets of 3 or 5 or 7, knowing their colors and their shapes. Our reading readiness, like I said, is more about the alphabet, and introducing the letters and the sounds that they make, and then trying to get them to understand reading left to right. This group has picked up a lot of, they asked what the dot was at the end when we were reading Chicken Soup with Rice. So I explained what a period is, and then sometimes they see a dot with a line on top. Well, that's an exclamation point. You read that with excitement. So it just depends on where their interest is, but when we're reading, trying to point and get their left to right reading print awareness. Our pre-writing skills are working with their letters and numbers a lot. And then they do a lot of free drawing. We try and have them copy lines, copy zigzags, copy other things. And then the big one for us this year is we're really concentrating on writing their names. So that kind of brings me to our PLC stuff. So our PLC, my PLC, in focus is trying to get every kid to be able to write their name for the kindergarten teachers. That's something I remember. They have to put their name on a lot of things, and so we're trying to get them to develop that readiness that they can write their name. So, as our district, obviously, we're working towards employability skills, and it's really cool. If you'll click on that, how many of these things that are on that you just saw on our social emotional things that are goals of ours? Showing up on time, listening to teachers, asking questions, accept advice, and feedback, things like that. So it's pretty cool that this is for our oldest learners, and our youngest learners are working on a lot of the same things, just at a different time. So on our vertical days, we do collaborating with the pre-K through 3. We try to align our math, our reading, all those things we're talking about, making sure that we don't have gaps in that. On my horizontal days, I work with Candace Kramer, who's our child and special ed teacher, and she's in my classroom some. And so we're studying the data, the things like the samples of their writing, their name, things like that. All kids are assessed in the fall. We ask them to try and write their name, and then we're trying to meet them where they're at and develop. So some of the things we might do is tracing dotted letters of their name, just having them write it on the back of the projects, writing with different media like pencils, markers, crayons, things like that to gain interest. We practice on our whiteboards. As you can see, we use Play-Doh to try and create their names. We spell it with the magnetic letters, and then the first day of school, I've always done this in kindergarten too, but they decorate their name. So they get markers and they get to decorate what they're, but we use this every day when we're using a letter. We'll search through this book and see if we're learning about H. The kids get so excited when they make their letters in that name. So we use these throughout the year, our name book. So it's just another way that we try and encourage it. So we're always also trying to get them to say their letters as they're spelling it. So some of them don't make the benchmark, or they don't know how to write their name maybe. So for some of them, they're not developmentally ready for it. So we work on the fine motor skills, pencil grips. We try and get them excited about it to try, and we accept. This is an excellent, I mean, she's very skilled at writing her name, but we try and accept what they can do and just work on what they need to work on. So, like I said, their ability levels are different, but we just trying to see improvement, and I think we are. So the goals of our 4K program, obviously, we want to develop a love for school, build their ability to be independent, and get them ready for kindergarten. So that's our goals. Do you have any questions about the 4K program, Chris?
Just saying, you've got firsthand knowledge of these 4K students. Do you see any challenges that a full day of class might bring? Or a full week?
Full week? There's challenges too. Here's what I say. We used to have that when we had a full day kindergarten. When I started teaching it 30 years ago, it's like, wow, you have full day. A lot of places had half day. But for busing reasons, we put them 4K, whatever kid it is, they're going to do something all day. So as long as we can keep, the numbers appropriate, if we can give them their rest time or what they need, I don't see it as a problem. They're going to do something all day. So whether they're here half day and we send them home, they're going to go do something else. They're going to go to daycare somewhere and do something. So I think this is a great place for them to be. It's just a matter of making sure that we're doing what's right for them. So if it's too overwhelming for them, then I can see it being a problem. If it was too many kids or things like that. But overall, I think it's a good idea. I think they're a lot safer here maybe than there are other places.
So I would assume you've been in on discussions when it comes to planning maybe some type of a school day as it pertains to the hours and what the students might be doing throughout the day.
We're working. I have a lot of trust in my administration, and we talk all the time. So yeah, I don't think that's an issue.
And are you satisfied with the proposal that they're going to bring forward today?
But it's so hard right now because we don't have numbers, and then we won't probably until, being a 5K teacher before we had the 4K program, I was part of the committee that started the 4K program. I was on that when it started. And that first time we're expecting kids to come in, until they actually show up, we don't know. They can leave too. So the unpredictability of the numbers is really the hard part of it, but it's going to be no matter what. So I think it would be a very good thing. I have high hopes for it. So thank you.
And I think you'll be able to, this is going to be a part of my presentation too. There'll be an opportunity to ask some questions and you'll probably clarify some of those components. We're way early in the process yet.
Well, then maybe my question will be dealt with later. But, we know that 4K is not compulsory.
Right.
And so what's the percentage of families that take advantage of 4K, that stay away, I guess maybe stay away from 4K, but do send their kids to 5K?
Well, I don't think there's,
Is
we
there
have some that don't
handful?
send them to our 4K.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a few families I know in the district that work in Marshfield, so like they talked to me and they said, it's nothing against you, Mr. Sangy, but our kids come into Marshfield with me,
Yeah.
and things like that. But now I see like one is on the 5K registration, so they're local family. It's just worked better for their family not to come then, but I don't think there's a ton that hold them up.
That just choose not to enroll their
Right.
children.
I don't think there are many, no.
Okay.
No. Obviously, there's probably some, so.
We could probably pull that data just by looking at
Previous
residents,
numbers.
looking at previous numbers of 4K and then seeing what the 5K numbers were. But then you're going to have, people may have moved in, open enrollment, but we could probably get a reasonable idea. But I agree with Todd. I don't think it's a huge, huge number.
I
So,
wouldn't think it would be.
yeah. And I will touch on that a little bit, that component of my presentation.
Any other questions?
Just thank you. And, from someone who runs an organization that's a large employer in this area, everything that a child learned in kindergarten or 4K now is what's really important. So
You remember the book, right?
it is, well, and the poster, right?
Yeah,
Everything I ever needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is that people missed that in so many components. So that perspective is just so important. And thank you for seeing and valuing that and what that means as a basis for our kids as they move through learning all of the education they need to learn, but they really also just need to learn how to be great humans, right?
Exactly.
So, thank you.
I love my job and I appreciate everything you guys do to
Thanks.
support us. So.
Thank you.
Okay, back to our oldest students, we're gonna celebrate the salutatorian and valedictorian in the class of 2023.
Dr. Watson.
Yeah, I didn't have anything prepared for it, but I did name there.
Yeah, that's,
Yes,
that's
that's
it.
all.
Yeah,
The valedictorian is Natalie Fuller, the salutatorian will be Trish Wood. I didn't go look at me, so I didn't have a presentation.
that is your presentation. Names.
There,
Do we need to approve that, Naomi? I think that is later on, correct?
It is, this is your.
It is on discussion.
I'm sorry.
So this is just celebrating that they are the
Okay.
salutatorian.
Okay,
So congratulations to both of them.
hold on.
Thank you. Next is the district administrator update.
Okay. And you should have the link, you can
Yes.
put it on there. So, I want to start with a couple of announcements about some upcoming events. Number one would be it is CTE Appreciation and Acknowledgement Month of February is. We will be having a CTE night at PHS on February 21st. Opportunity for the community to come in, visit with the teachers, learn more about technical colleges, and then they're going to have some hands-on activities available for them. My understanding is some giveaways, some goodies to give out, samples of some student work. So, a little shameless plug for Nate. Pittsfield running their first 3-on-3 youth basketball tournament coming up in March, on March 25th. So if you see that out on social media, I know it was open to local players first and then went live to everyone else. Yeah, I saw a cap of 6 teams per division. What if you get a huge amount of interest?
Let's see.
Okay,
Be a good thing to have.
sounds good. Yes, for sure.
And Jim's gonna be doing
What's that?
it. Jim's gonna be doing
March 25th?
it.
We'll have bigger problems than that if it's not done on March 25th.
Yeah.
So, winter sports update. So our wrestling team, finished the dual meet season up. They finished 8-5 and they placed 5th in the conference. Very tough wrestling conference. There are some powerhouse wrestling teams in the conference. We did have 4 folks who made the stand. Brad, Caden, Landon, and Dryden all placed, with Brad and Caden being our highest placed finishers. They took 4th overall in a 16-team tournament in Independence. And Brad and Dryden were also top finishers in that. Brad was a champion. This coming Saturday is the Super Regional, so the start of the tournament series here. So it's winner go home. Top 4 will advance to sectionals at Richland Center. So some photos. The wrestling thing, Sam, if you ever needed a reason, right, as a basketball player not to wrestle, is seeing pictures like in the bottom left corner. I just don't get it, but
Not so bad if you're on top.
yeah, right. The girls basketball team, currently sitting at 12-7. They've had to battle through some injuries, and it's been kind of a next woman up mentality, which is what you have to do. Long basketball seasons, you're going to have injuries, you're going to have those types of things happen, and ups and downs. So they're back this week. They're going to have 2 tough conference opponents, Pacelli and Wild Rose. We have very quality basketball conferences. One thing I found up here, I'm used to the Merriwood coming back up here, but with Pacelli, Assumption, and some of the schools in our conference, it's a very competitive conference. The nice thing about that is it prepares you for the playoffs when you play in a tough conference and you have to compete week in and week out with those teams. Some photos. I have to admit, with the girls' basketball photos, I had to use some older. I try to keep updated photos, but the website has not had, the Facebook page hasn't had updated girls' basketball photos for the last 2 weeks. So I had to do some searching to try to find some photos I hadn't used before. So if anybody recognizes those are gyms that we played in 5 weeks ago, I'm owning it right now, not trying to mislead. The boys basketball team, they're sitting at 13-6 right now. Had a tough week against state ranked teams last week. And they're hoping to bounce back this Thursday against Wild Rose. And Sam, last conference game is next week, is that correct?
No, we got 2 more.
2 more?
Yeah, because Port Edwards is senior night and then Ronald Schultz
Got
is
it.
very last
Okay.
week.
All right, and then into playoff time. The hope is, as you'll see later with my update, is we're hoping that everything works out and we're gonna be able to have both our boys and girls teams should be hosting that. We're hoping for first round on the new floor in the varsity gym. Some pictures. All right, varsity gym update. I think I went over this before, but when the damage happened, the decision was made. Dan had come to Pam and I about doing some upgrades with LED lighting in the facility. And the decision was made, number one, I believe Pam correct me, around 3 years with these LED lights. The cost savings over the course of 3 years, Dan had said in the 4th year, that we would be at a cost control.
I actually did not
range.
share that.
Yeah, it was either, I couldn't remember if it was the 3rd year or the 4th year that the lights will actually be paying for themselves after that, the cost of installing efficiency lighting. And I know most haven't had a chance to peek in there. It is a significant upgrade in the lighting. So it's a much brighter white light in the gym. The painting and design was finished last week, and they did some sanding on Friday. They're gonna sand and buff likely tomorrow. And then they'll do 3 coats of the finish and a coat of hardener. And Dan had indicated they could do all that in 1 day. And I'm not sure how that is because I was like, you had to let something dry in between coats, but apparently they do the whole thing in 1 day, and then it'll have to take 10 days to cure after the hardener is applied. So estimated opening is the 3rd week in February. I don't want to get to a specific date, but we're discussing some possibilities of how we may open the facility back up by maybe having like a little open house in the evening to let the community come in and see the new gym, and also allowing staff to maybe have a sneak peek after school prior to open. Kind of a big deal. We're looking at our padding being upgraded. We took the opportunity to do some other upgrades in the facility, thinking that this is a one-shot deal, and now the floor that's gonna be in there, Dan said, will last most of us, it's gonna be 25 to 30 years, the floor that was put in now. So we wanted to make sure we got it right. We're very happy with the design, and I think the community will be happy when they see it. So I'm putting this up here only because I was impressed with my photo editing, putting those green check marks. So this is from last month. Yeah, that took me a lot longer than it did. I had to find a green check mark and then copy and paste it, make it all light up. This was the calendar, the timeline from last month, and I just wanted to show you this visual before we get to the calendar that all of those things were accomplished. And I will be sharing the survey data with you when I present the 2 calendars to you from the community staff survey. And then the staff did a survey on the 2 calendars that were developed by the calendar committee. So I just wanted to show you this as a visual that it was mission accomplished to the point where we got it to the board on time here in February. Yep,
Jason, can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
about Varsity gym before.
Yep.
Do you have an estimate of what it actually ended up costing the district that we hadn't budgeted?
so the insurance coverage,
$2,500 was our deductible.
yeah, we paid
That's all it's
$2,500.
cost us at this point.
Okay,
The insurance should cover the rest.
What about the lighting and?
The lighting was additional, so the lighting and the hiring of the lift, because we had to get a taller lift. I want to say it was around 7,500 total. So that
Just
was
for
not
facility.
budgeted either, but it was the best time to do it.
sure.
It was, we had the facility available without anybody being in there, and then knowing that we were gonna get the payoff in 3 years, that the lights were gonna pay for themselves with it. It was a good move. We did get, I wanted to say E-rates, that's on technology.
Focus on
We got
energy
the
credit,
focus
we
on
will get
energy
that.
credits right now, some that were expiring if we didn't make the decision to move forward now, so it made sense to.
Thank
do it now. Yep, I know the actual amount of the work was capped at 260.
Well, that stalker piece was
Yeah, for the floor.
275,000, but there was the remediation, there was, wall work, ceiling work, piping work, so I haven't totaled everything up yet, because we don't have all of those yet.
And that'll be,
Thank you.
she'll kind of finalize all that after we get in all those costs, but the floor piece itself was about $250,000 to do it for. So, okay, so you heard Todd's academic spotlight, so there's gonna be some components we're gonna go over here tonight, and I wanna preface the presentation here with telling you that, as you heard me kind of articulate, we're early in this process right now, early in that we need to see numbers and we need to have some other things determined before we set what a schedule might look like. The point behind looking at some of these things is we have to be able to communicate to families what we're planning on having for options, and then look at the numbers, and then the big thing you're gonna hear, it's about choices for families, about having options available for everyone, depending on what their developmental stage of their child is and what their schedule looks like. And that's why we're really excited about this format. And we want to get it out to the families so that they can then sit down and as a family decide, this is the option we're looking at. And some of them may choose the full day option, some may choose the half day option. And we feel like we have a pretty solid plan laid out. So I'll go through this. If you want to ask questions at any time, please feel free to stop. I will defer to Heather and Matt and Todd at points throughout here to answer some questions and give their input, okay? All right. So 4-year-old kindergarten, it's the opportunity to participate in a consistent early learning program. We talked about, I don't remember this, I think Marion asked it, it's not compulsory in the state of Wisconsin that you attend 4K. It's optional. There are districts that I know my previous district who didn't start offering 4K until 9 years ago. The district made the decision to do 4K. So there's still districts that weren't offering 4K recently. So Pittsville's history of offering a 4K program is, pretty progressive as far as when we started offering a 4K opportunity here. So through that 4K program, and it's really a comprehensive program, they build their social and pre-academic skills. And you've heard it mentioned, Julie talked about it with employability skills, Todd talked about it, but it's the foundation for their future growth and success. And it's really important. Our goal, provide exceptional, developmentally appropriate. You're gonna hear that ad nauseum. You heard Todd in his presentation. It's gotta be developmentally appropriate. And another key, play-based learning experiences. At that age, honestly, at many of the primary grades, play-based learning experiences open to all 4-year-olds. So our priority is and always will be our children's emotional, educational, societal, and physical well-being. It's all of those things. And once again, kids develop at different rates and stages. The one thing I think we all agree on is it's through care. Todd talked about that repeatedly, is that we want our kids to develop a love for school and a love for the folks here and build relationships with our families. And it's done through care, a consistent schedule, and regular contact with our families. I mean, that's not like that's a secret recipe. And we know that, communication, consistency, and care about people pretty much could probably apply that in just about anything we do. So the benefits of full day, 5 days per week, and I want to qualify this. Our plan is to have a half day option available in this, and I'll kind of talk about why full day as an option. So it's a consistent schedule for families and children. They have regular access to staff and resources. And we'll talk about, I'm going to have Matt kind of jump in and talk about some of our early childhood kids and some of our students that we may be able to identify as needing support, and having them there on a consistent basis allows for you to see those things and to maybe try to intervene earlier. Food insecurity, we're 40%, close to 40% low SES in this district. And, Mary Ann reminded me of something today when we were talking about a grant, is that K-8, we're 48% low SES in this district. So almost 50% of our students, K-8, are low socioeconomic status. So the food insecurity piece is a big deal. And the food insecurity piece is when they're here every day, they're going to have a reliable meal. They're going to have 2 meals, and a snack reliably every single day when they're here. And it addresses that food insecurity piece. It's one of the issues over the summer that you see with families and kids with the food insecurity piece. Expanded opportunities for family involvement and enrichment. That's a big piece of 4K, is getting the families involved and excited about school too. It's not just the kids, it's getting the families, because there's, I'm sure Todd can attest to, there's separation anxiety for a lot of the people thinking with the kids, for the families, for many of the parents, that's difficult. The thought of, it's their first time where they're leaving their kids to us, they're leaving them in our care, and that's a difficult thing for families, and it's working with families to whatever their comfort level is. And then additional resources to maintain and build on that early learning program. And it's just, we have resources available. Families need to choose what's best for their children. The ones who choose to keep their kids home and not utilize 4K, absolutely is okay. The thing we like about here is that we have those resources available for families that they may not have access to. And we're pretty satisfied. Matt will touch on, I don't want to steal his thunder, but one thing we would talk about with the 5-day access. So we're a small district. We don't have a full-time speech and language person. We don't have a full-time OT. We contract through CISA for our OTPT. Speech and language, we have a person on a partial 3-day contract. The thing about it is with a schedule, if your kids aren't here every day, if you have kids that are receiving services, we also have other students that are receiving those services from those folks. So it's coordinating, like, when do they get their services, and are you receiving those services on a consistent basis? Because once again, consistency is important. So I'll let Matt, there'll be an opportunity for Matt to kind of touch base on that specifically as we go through. So the guiding principles, play-based and developmentally appropriate, right? Universal access and family choice. That's the piece where I talk about with the option for half day. Effectively, here's the only option that would be available in our format, and it's the only one we couldn't come up with under the constraints of saying, listen, we need to do what's best for kids, best for families, but it's also something we can logistically do within our budgetary constraints. Is a half day afternoon is the only thing we couldn't offer. Is if a family wanted to take only afternoon for the half day, we wouldn't be able to do that component. And I'll kind of touch base on why that is as we talk about what our estimated format is with the numbers that we are projecting at right now going in. Ongoing collaboration and professional development. Todd talked about the PLCs, that vertical meeting, he does that with kindergarten 1, 2. Todd, is that all primary or is it just
K3, pre-K3?
It is all pre-K 2 and 3. So, talking about what are those components, the critical targets, what do the kids need to know to be successful in kindergarten? First grade's talking to kindergarten about what do we need kids to have for those skills to be successful in first grade. That's that vertical piece that you hear folks talking about from those early release PLCs. A strong focus on family school communication and regular outreach activities for families. I can't say that enough, that 4K is as much about getting the families involved, because once they get involved early, they're going to stay involved typically. And there's a lot of research that talks about, you want to see success in children in school, is get families involved and engaged in their learning at school. We're partners. So curriculum, it's based on the Wisconsin Model Early Learning Standards, and those assessments along with, frequent progress run. You need to know where our kids at, right? It's not only having these learning targets, but we need to know if they're progressing, where are they at? And so you know where you need to, when you talk about interventions, where to intervene or where to add support for kids to get to those targets. Goal would be at the end of the year to have everyone there. The reality is that doesn't always happen, right? There may not be some components that are met, but the idea behind the progress monitoring is that before you get to the end of the journey. You find it out as you're going along the way, and you can make modifications and adjustments as you're going through. So a few things to know. 4K is free to all families. Our plan right now, looking at numbers. So Matt, I'm going to have you talk just briefly about the numbers and kind of where we get the idea where we're projecting numbers going into this point. We won't know obviously until, sometimes they'll get into the middle of the summer, but Matt, you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yep, so the last couple of years for our child development days, I've utilized our census data to personally email our families who were between the ages of 2 years, 9 months, and 5 who were not in school. So I've been asking Mrs. Dunn the last couple of years to provide that report for me. And I have noticed that number correlates very, very well to what our actual 4K numbers have been the past 2-ish years. So this year, I asked Mrs. Dunn again to provide that for me. In our conversations about changing what our 4K setup kind of looks like. So right now, looking at those census numbers, we have 15 students who will be 4K eligible in September, which is down from what we've had in the past. Now again, like Mr. Knott said, is it going to be 15 kids come September? I can tell you that I know of one family for sure that's not on there. I know of a couple other open enrollment families as well who are not on there. So that number, is not 100% accurate, but I can also tell you that I don't foresee us having 45 students enrolled for 4K either. So that is something that we have to kind of think about when it comes to, I think, our plan, this year and our plan moving forward, because again, we want to make sure that we're consistent on our end as well. We don't be putting something out there where everyone's like, gosh, I love the way you guys have it formatted, and then next year we completely change everything. So as a team, we've kind of been talking about, our staffing and how can we best meet the needs of our students. So since my tenure here, our early childhood special education kiddos have had their own separate days. To no fault of anyone, it just kind of worked to that point.
Matt, can you clarify for folks, just,
Yeah.
for what early childhood they're,
So for our students who qualify for special education, after birth to 3, it doesn't necessarily have to be a referral from them, but we have the obligation to provide services for all of our 3-year-old students through 21. So for our kiddos, if they're not 4K eligible, an early childhood special education student would be under that age of 4. So Mrs. Kramer, who is our current early childhood special education teacher, she provides services for kiddos 2 days a week. So very similar to what Mr. Sankin has for our 4K kids. Our schedule is a little bit smaller, just because again, a lot of times we've noticed that stamina-wise, that hasn't been necessarily their strength, especially at 3. But what our thought would be is to have them around their typically developing peers as much as possible. Because again, our numbers in special education, they mirror our population. We don't have 15 early childhood special education kiddos. We have, roughly 3 to 4 every year. And to have 3 or 4 of those kiddos in their own classroom at all times isn't necessarily the best environment. You want them around their peers. You want them doing the exact same things their peers are doing. For us to do that, we have to get into Mr. Sankin's room. So Mrs. Kramer has discussed with me a couple different times that she has a passion for potentially looking down the road at getting that certification. And we kind of thought that with this transition, there really might not be a better time to have her kind of move towards that as well. Just because, again, looking at what our numbers are between her and Mr. Sankin and Mrs. Schultzen, I think that allows us a really wonderful opportunity to meet the needs of my special education students, our special education students, and also provide, a unique perspective for, all of our kids, because I think that is the one benefit from having outside individuals coming into that classroom as well. So I think that's one area that we've discussed where if we would move to a session where it's full days, with that half-day offering, that morning session would be broken down into 2 separate groups. Mr. Sank would have one group, Mrs. Kramer would have one group, and we would split it up evenly. Obviously, from a special education standpoint, we would have our early childhood special education kiddos with Mrs. Kramer, because we do have to make sure we're providing that service from a certified teacher who is licensed in that area. But the benefits that I would see from my end would be that consistency for our kids, being around their typically developing peers. And then again, Mr. Knott kind of touched on it too. We're never going to have numbers that would require us to have a full-time occupational therapist or a physical therapist or a speech and language pathologist. It's just nature of the beast. So it makes things really, really difficult when, CISA tells me that, well, our OT can only come there on Wednesdays because we also have them contracted with 2 other neighboring districts. Well, that makes things hard then because, well, my kids aren't coming on Wednesday. So now to have them receive services, we either have to provide transportation or, if a mom and dad are available to bring them in, that's great as well. But we don't have a ton of flexibility to where if we would have 5 days a week of 4K be available, and again, have that option also there for our early childhood kiddos, it'll really change a lot of things when it comes to not just meeting the needs of those younger kids, but then the schedules for the rest of our kids as well, because it's always impacted, somewhere down the road where, You know, if I can only get student X, Y, and Z in on this morning, well, now I can only meet student A, B, and C in the afternoon. And unfortunately, I gotta pull them from a class that maybe they really enjoy or they maybe really need. So you're always stealing from Peter to pay Paul. That's the unfortunate part about the way, you know, special education is kind of formatted. But I think by doing what we're discussing right now, it really is gonna meet the needs of all of our kids.
So Matt, currently, is it just the 3-year-olds that are separated, or are 4-year-olds that would actually qualify for
Yep.
4K separated with Mrs. Kramer?
So for our students who are 4K eligible and also receiving early childhood special education services, we actually have them come in 4 days a week. So 2 days with Mr. Sankin and 2 days with Mrs. Kramer. We have their schedules on opposite days. Because again, we have noticed that consistency really plays a huge role for a lot of our students.
Thank you, Matt. Excellent explanation. I even learned a couple of things today. And I think when folks hear that, the full day piece, I think, which is why it's important for us to be able to get out, like start communicating to folks, is they think that this is gonna be like a intermediate school schedule, like they're gonna be going, well, it is absolutely essential that it's developmentally appropriate, and it's still gonna be the instructional component. That play-based learning is gonna be focused in those AM sessions, in those 2 groups, and then the afternoon is gonna be broken up, and this is the piece where we don't have this shored up yet, because we still need to get an idea on numbers and how many folks would take advantage of that after the full day session, because we may be surprised that maybe half of the people would be like, yep, we want that opportunity, which means we might be sitting at, somewhere between 9 and 10 to 12 people if we get to similar numbers as this year, it gets up to. And then we can start planning a little deeper into what that might look like. But what we do is, the staff that we have Todd is a full day person, is a 4K person. We have Linda, who is assigned, she comes every day but Wednesday, because there is no 4K on Wednesdays right now. And then we have Candace effectively available in the AMs in the format that Matt just talked about. So that's knowing that we have existing staff, that's what we have to work with, depending on how many kids we get to set up a format in the structure of full day option full days with half day option would work within those frames, right? Right now with the numbers that we're projecting in any of those structures that we would set up. So that was the part where I said we're early in the process of kind of figuring out what a day might look like. But some examples of afternoon type activities would be, you heard, I think Todd mentioned about they need an app, like they need rest time, right? And that is absolutely a fact, and that would be the case. They need play, they need recess, they need play time. It's an excellent opportunity. I'll tell you one thing that's the most exciting to us is enrichment opportunities, like taking little trips, maybe down to the public library, those types of things that, sometimes we take for granted, but there are families that aren't going to have the opportunity to do those types of things. Having specials, they get counseling class right now, and then the library visits and stuff, those things to break up those afternoons into those components. And once again, it goes back to families will have the choice if they feel that their children, in talking about that, maybe I don't want to steal a question, one of you may ask is, well, what if someone wants to change? What we would be looking at would be setting up like changes at the term. So if someone at the term felt like, hey, 9 weeks, we were trying the full day thing, just not working, is we want to have a logical time to make those changes or to bring students in. That being said, if there was an exceptional circumstance, are we going to say, nope, sorry? No, of course not. But we just need to have some parameters just so we can kind of plan through things. Transportation. So I'm going to tell you, the way funding works for 4K in the state of Wisconsin, you are funded, and let's say it's always going to come down to money. I'm not going to get a soapbox and preach to you tonight, but what I'm going to tell you is a lot of times what's best for kids doesn't happen because of money. Sometimes it's a matter of funding, like we don't have the money. Sometimes there's not money in it, so we're not going to do it. With 4K, you are funded at
It's $525
$25.
hours, you get 0.6 of an FTE for each child. Each 4K child counts and has a 0.6.
Effectively, to put that into context, what that means is the state, even if you have kids here the whole day, you only get funded 0.6. So that's why a lot of districts don't run an all-day 4K. I can guarantee you that if the state changed that funding formula to 1.0 FTEs for 4K kids, you would see a rush of districts going to all-day 4K, not for the right reasons, but they would be rushing to go to all-day 4K. The other thing that prohibits a lot of and there are a lot of districts that do 5-day options. Rapids, Marshfield, Matt can talk to you about Auburndale.
Yep, I was just talking with colleagues tonight, they're exploring options as well, about, very similar to what we're doing right now. Just how to best meet the needs of their students as well.
And what you see with small districts, with small rural districts that don't do options that are, why wouldn't they do the half day? Because in a perfect world, the reason I like the full day option is for some kids and some families, that is, they're ready for a full day option. And for some families, let's be frank, if you're trying to find childcare for multiple days a week, that can be very cost prohibitive in a district that's, 40% low SES. But ideally, you would be looking at two half days, right? Half day sessions. You will get people who will be like, that doesn't work for me. I work until this point, I can't pick my child up. And there will be folks that will tell you, I want this session or that session. It gets kind of complicated. But the reality is it comes down to busing for rural districts. Why don't they do that? I mean, I was told, I tried finding out some information. I talked to Todd, to Heather, to Matt, I didn't talk to Rod because he'd only been here for a year and I didn't think he would have any longitudinal information on that. Talked to him, like, when did this all start? And what I got, information I got is, I remember back in the day, we did half day kindergarten. I remember doing half day kindergarten. And I was told what happened was that we went away from it because of transportation costs. You're running, at that time, we had 85 kids in a class. If you're running 4 or 5 bus routes extra during that time frame, because you got to run those every day, that is, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. So you do those things out of necessity, right? Not because it's necessarily what's best for kids and developmentally best for kids. So it's about the busing. So what I really like about this plan, we originally looked at an option where we said, well, let's cost out what the busing would cost. Okay, and we found out. Well, then we went back to the drawing board to say, is there an option we could come up with that wouldn't cost us $100,000 to run bus routes? And this was the piece that we really kept settling on to say, this just makes sense because it checks so many boxes and it comes down to family choice. They can choose which option works for them and their families. The only thing they won't be able to choose is having that instructional component take place in the afternoon. That's the only option that's not available because those two groups are going to be focused on doing the play-based learning in the mornings and the enrichment type activities and the rest time and stuff, and specials will be in the afternoons. So that would be the one group. If you were to ask me what's one family, I wouldn't be able to say we can give you exactly, it would be that situation. However, I feel like we would check so many of the other boxes that in that situation, I feel like people would be like, you know what, I get most of what I need in that situation, so I would be happy with that. Go ahead, Julie.
What's the maximum number of students that we can run in this situation? So it looks like and sounds like, we're probably looking at 15 to 20 students coming this next year. So that works kind of with our current staffing. Looks like we're not getting any more state funding because they're only going to count as a 0.6 no matter what. So like, what's that sweet spot of what would be the max we could take in future years without needing to hire? And how does that align with what I'm guessing happens, which is, oh, everyone had a baby, no one had a baby. Everyone had a baby, no one had a baby.
I mean, COVID babies come.
Right, I mean, it's what happens in small districts.
So-
because it's all the same families and you typically don't have a kid every year. It's about every other. for a few years.
So really good question, and I'm gonna let the others jump in, and this is what I'm gonna tell you is, it's a holistic kind of approach, and Heather and her group would be starting to look at that right now, going into years. You look at your grade levels, and you look at your staffing at different grade levels, primary wise. Because a lot of times what you'll see is you'll have classes, you saw it in our packet, we have the enrollment right now. I'm sure you looked at some of those numbers. The one thing Todd had talked about is sometimes families will, I think you had mentioned this, Todd, that sometimes families will, maybe the team will make a determination that at the end of the year, there may be a student that just developmentally would benefit from doing 4K again, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
If you did that, you would be looking at, then those students wouldn't be moving up to kindergarten, so the numbers at kindergarten might be lower. So we look at it as a whole piece. We look at our numbers at first grade, you look at your numbers at kindergarten, you look at your numbers at 4K. So to answer your question, I don't know if there's a number, I would say like, this is the tipping point. What I would tell you is if you look at our numbers right now at other grade levels and our staffing at grade levels, we have some flexibility to be able to move resources where we would have if we had larger numbers to move resources. There are AGR limits, right? And Heather's gonna talk, she had the AGR report, but here's what the caveat with that is. The AGR component, if you have a instructional coach or interventionist available, you are able to exceed the AGR limits per class. Is that good practice? No, probably not, right? No one's gonna argue this, but does it mean that the difference between 19 kids in a class and 18 means that all of a sudden all learning is gonna stop? No, absolutely not. Do you wanna get up into the mid-20s in those early primary levels? No, I don't think anybody would say you want to do that. Right now, we're pretty happy with the way our numbers are. Kindergarten numbers, I think we have an average of 14 per class right now in kindergarten. First grade, we have 3 first grade teachers, it's about the same in first grade. Those are really good numbers. Those are numbers to be proud of, right? Like there's no one's gonna argue with me for all the reasons we were just talking about here about early interventions, like being able to dedicate resources in those early years when you could still, you're affecting that foundation. And I think Dr. Watson and I were talking the other morning, and he had brought up something that I had discussed as a high school principal staff, is that when we get kids who are sophomores in high school, who read at a 4th grade level, what do you do for interventions for sophomores in high school? What's the reality? You do what you can, just to try to get it where the point where they can be employable with maybe those basic technical reading skills. If I could go in a time machine, what would we do for those kids? Get them by 3rd grade and do those interventions and change it before then, before they get to where they're reading at a 4th grade level as a sophomore in high school. There's just very little. I'm never gonna tell you, we ever say, sorry, we can't do anything. We will go to the end of the earth for every one of our students. But the reality is early interventions and addressing these things early, when you have smaller class sizes, it's more likely the teacher is going to be able to observe these things and dedicate that time and commit to the kids to do that.
So currently they're 16 and 10, so would it be reasonable to say that we could handle 16 in each class?
Todd?
Here's what I would say. Last year we had 42 4-year-olds, 21 4-year-olds in that classroom. No matter how many adults put in there, when it comes to rest time, there's not enough space on the floor to lay all their mats down and get them far enough apart to rest. It was struggle. It was hard. It was very hard here with 21. That's that 20. It's pushing it. That's tough in the afternoons to do that. Obviously, we have a plan for the mornings when we have a couple other people. We would split them up a little bit, but the afternoons are where I'm concerned with our numbers over 20.
So
I think
16 to 18 feels
for
comfortable.
4-year-olds, I think with me and Linda in there, I think that's very
36.
doable.
And that would be
I guess-
assuming they would all take that full day
Right.
option,
Right.
because it's quite likely there's gonna be families that are gonna say, my kid is just.
It's just really hard to not, I think it's very important to make decisions that we're actually gonna stick to long term
Yes.
versus changing schedules up for parents along the way. I mean, not that changes don't happen,
Yeah.
but we're already gonna talk about another change that we just changed, now we're changing your day. And that's hard on parents when you've got a plan and now you're asking to change something. So just making sure that we have enough resources to consider it for the long. I mean, I think it's a great option. Just want to make sure we can consider it for the long haul.
Julie, that very conversation piece took place as far as what this model was. What are we gonna be able to do where if we do get up to those numbers, this structure will work? And what it comes down to is, what I just talked to you about, the staffing, is right now with the numbers we have, even if they go up slightly, this with having Candace available in the mornings will work. If it got to the point where the numbers were higher, to the point where we had to look at that option, then that's where we look at those other numbers, the kindergarten numbers, and we look at, do we then end up, for the reasons we just said, what's important to build this strong foundation is, do we end up having one of our staff go down and we want two full sections? And that's the assurance that I've said. I talked to Todd last week. One thing I said to Todd is, I said, Todd, I can't guarantee anything until we see numbers. What I can promise you is we're not going to leave you hanging out to dry here and say, well, this is what we got. We just need to kind of see where the numbers are. What we do know is this format right now is sustainable, long term. This is something that's built for the long term, because, I know change is difficult, and I tell you, the one thing I would think about is, I'm thinking in terms, we all look at stuff from our perspective, right? Thinking of when my kids were in 4K is thinking about if I had to try to plan for 2 days a week and knowing I had to find care for the other three. If you got a grandma or grandpa available, it's fine, but was looking at saying, this is that consistency piece and talking about routines. I don't need to tell Todd this or anybody who's worked with primary kids or raised your own kids. Routine and structure, they get into that. And sometimes when you go 4 days between, it's gonna be difficult to get them to do rest time and those things because, you know, they get out of that, they're in a different format. Those of us that have been through daylight savings time with young kids and just sitting us thinking about who thought of this, they never had kids that thought of daylight savings time, this is ridiculous, right? Is those things, is that routine piece, but this is the assurance I can give you from this side, it's our job. Our job is to make sure that the resources are available to do this. Like, we're not going to write checks that we can't cash with this to families because we don't want to make promises we can't keep. We have right now the resources and structure available to lay this out. Heather and her team are going next week, the 15th of February, to visit a 4K site that runs a similar format to this over in Rapids to kind of talk to them about what does your day look like. We've been reaching out to other sites. Now, here's the thing, I want to put that with a caveat. We're Pittsville. We're not these other places. What's going to work for some of them isn't going to work for us, right? We have some constraints they may not have. But we do know, looking through this checks so many of the boxes. And I don't ever want to say, like, I know we've been doing this for I believe, Todd, 24 years. I know we've been doing this for 24 years, but the question that we would pose is, I think, you know, I've said this, people have heard me say it before, when we know better, we do better. And we know, all of us know, that having our kids here on a consistent basis at whatever that developmental level the parent feels that they're at, with that parent choice piece, is what's best for our kids. This is a place where we want them to be at the comfort level of their families. And those that don't feel comfortable at all will do what they do now, is they won't send them. People won't for 4K, which is okay for them to do that. The one that we touched on, and I don't remember if Matt mentioned earlier about the one family, or Todd, I think you mentioned the family. What we hear a lot is, honestly, is like, if people are working in Marshfield or Rapids, one of the things is, with the 4K option up there or with the daycare, is that the reason they take them up there is because they know that they have that option to drop. If we have that option here, I'm not saying all of a sudden we're gonna see the parting of the Red Sea, people are gonna come in here. I know that that's gonna be an option, and some people who work in Marshall Rapids might say, holy cow, okay, so now I know consistently this is what's gonna be available. Talitha has also told us, as is the case now, priority in PCCC will go to our 4K students. So families are enrolled in our 4K, as far as getting in for other wraparound, other care, they will get priority to do that right now. We have 4 families in our 4K of our 26 right now that utilize PCCC, because we really tried to look at all things here. One of the things we looked at was, how is this going to impact PCCC? Like, are we going to, by doing this, is this going to pull kids from 4? And we had 4 of 26 families that did use that this year, right? Now, that's not a reason not to do it, to say, well, we don't want to take money from, because what we want to do is what's best for our family and what's best for our kids. So we've tried to take everything into account in going through this process. So I wanted to say the one caveat here is you gotta be 4 years old by September 1st. I wanted to make sure I got through all that. Site team, anybody else that I missed anything? Todd, Matt, Heather? I know I've been covering stuff at a pretty quick pace here, but and board, please stop at any time if you have any questions. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So morning sessions. So these are approximations right now, what we talked about, 8 to 11. And the afternoons, enrichment activities, specials, rest time, other play-based learning opportunities, recess, trying to break the day up. And you're talking about, by the time, Todd, it's 30-minute lunch right now. The kids.
We eat for 30 minutes, and in the winter time, it takes us another 15 to 20 to get them dressed a little.
Right. You saw me put down 437 hours of what's required by DPI for instruction for 4K. So if you remember, the 712 is 1,137 hours. 4K is 437 hours. So with doing that morning component, counting that, and we would be able to count the enrichment if we wanted to. Like, effectively, we're going to be well over the hours required for that, which is it's a good thing. You may have heard about the family outreach component. It's required 87.5 hours per year, per school year, that has to be completed with family outreach. Now, what kind of things qualify in that. I have a slide coming up that'll kind of give some examples, and I'll have Todd talk about examples, and Heather, of things that qualify for family outreach. The idea is they put this time in to encourage, you want to get your family involved, right? When you have families coming to see, like, if the kids are doing a little pageant, that counts as family outreach hours. When you're sending, packets, things home, books home for kids to do, there's various ways to meet those outreach, and that 87.5 hours is total. It's not per family. So that's total hours during the course of the school year. Does that make sense? Mary Ann, you furrowed your brow.
Well, okay, so wait, I thought that was, okay. So that means if you have 10 kids.
It's not per kid even like that. It's a
not per
total of
kid.
87.5
It's total of
hours.
80, okay.
You could, Todd would never do this, but you could give all of it to one family. We would not propose doing that, but it's 87.5 total hours.
Okay.
Why don't you go to the next slide? I gave some examples. So here, what is family outreach? Their family members are their first and most important teachers. We all know that, right? And they're partners in their education, equal partners. Now, do we have a lens as educators that we certainly feel like we can bring some perspective things? Yes. But we are partners in education with the families. Family outreach are designed to support and nurture the parents. And I like the term nurture. We don't like using the term educate, because too often in education we use that term that we're educating. We need to show people how to do things the right way. No, it's about nurture. It's about giving parents resources because how many of us here would, sometimes we've been frustrated kids, you reach out and look for support from someone. It's like you call a relative or someone, like, I don't know what to do right now, I'm struggling. Is we try to give some strategies, and then who knows their children best? The parents, the families do, right? Is that we also rely on them to talk to us about, what does your child need from us here at school? What do you need from us? And that's the whole point behind these. So examples of those things that would qualify: family resource nights, activity nights. So the resource nights, you're bringing families in to show them how they can support their kids. Todd talked about writing their name. Here's some things you can practice at home that we do here at school. Parent education classes. Those are just some examples. Todd, do you have any other examples just off the top of your head? I mean, to put you on the spot.
No, it's those kind of outreach. A lot of it's, this is their first experience for some of the families with schools, so they have a lot of questions about, how this works and how the lunch, just so many questions about what's coming up and what's happening. So it's a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls, it's a lot of just trying to talk people through that. Like you said, we try to do activity days where they come in and we have activities set up, and they can see how their kids can move things down, or do the fine motor skills, and try and show them some of that stuff. But it's just a lot of outreach and a lot of just conversations that you gotta have to try and help them get started, and so they feel comfortable. So.
Yeah. And once you open up those lines of communication, then they usually don't close. Usually that's something that kind of continues as the kids transition through school. Next slide. So what are the next steps? So the next steps are, you often hear me preach about transparency, and that's the key is that we're going to be transparent about what we're doing. We're going to take feedback. The schedule process, we're going to talk about an example of that, is that it took a lot longer than it probably could have, but we got information and input from all stakeholders. We got a committee together, we made a decision. Ultimately, did everybody agree with every component? No, but everybody felt like, you know what, I had a voice, I had some say in this, and I feel like I understand the concept of that. It'll be the same thing with this, is communicate. Matt, do you want to talk specifically about your outreach, that Matt's plan would be about individual outreach with those families he talked about earlier?
So one of the beauties of being a district our size is, especially in this situation with only having, roughly 15 families, we can contact them directly. We can have that conversation with them about what their vision is for their child in 4K. Having just had that conversation with the family last week, I think it was very beneficial to hear, their concerns, kind of talk about what some of our ideas are, what our vision is, and kind of go from there. So I think I would, recommend that we would, reach out to our 15 families that we currently know of, and a couple of the ones that we know are lingering, and just have that conversation with them about what we are proposing.
So then I talked about Heather doing an on-site visit with her team on the 15th to try to gather some information about what that day might look like. I think that's important because, this is all theory, we talk about it, but until you see it or talk to someone who's implemented it, you'll hear about some things like, well, we didn't think of this, or this is something that'll work for us that probably didn't work for you, or maybe there's some things that they're able to do that wouldn't fit within our ability level here with what we have for resources. So we're currently taking registrations via the website. Karen has, Heather's talked about it. Karen knows to the minute. She gives updates when she gets registrations for 4K. So that'll be all the way through the summer. Like we will know when new registrations come in, and I'm kind of fanatical about getting enrollment updates. I'll ask every once in a while, I'll shoot Karen an email and say, Karen, give me current numbers, and she'll print this Skyward document and give me numbers at each grade level, just so we can kind of see where things are at, because we do have, like this year, we've had a influx of open enrollment in students come in during the course of the school year. Even within the past week, we've had three come in, right? So there's things change, but we're usually pretty on top of that as far as watching and monitoring when those things change. And I'll go back to what I said previously. I feel like the structure we have right now, knowing, now if we were sitting at like 26 or 27 on the census data right now, would we be already probably looking ahead saying we're probably gonna have to look at 2 full day people, right? Yes, that's the reality, because usually, Matt, would you say on average we've talked that those numbers will go up 4 to 5 maybe from that data, like we'll see?
I would say right around there,
on
for
average.
sure. Potentially more. Again, I know there are a few families that did not complete it, so I would definitely be comfortable saying that we would have, for sure, at least 4.
That would be in addition to
Addition
that,
to our
that would
50.
add to that number, plus any that would come back, that would choose to come back, and the families and the team would choose to do 4K over again, so.
And then the additional 3-year-olds.
Yep,
in
potential
special
early childhood
education.
programs, yep.
Yep, we have two right now. Yep. So, and then we would be looking at an open house registration coinciding with our empty bowls. Like we need to market, to market our 4K. What we're excited about is once we kind of get some structure set up and we have some idea numbers and we get more definitive about what is this going to look like? What's the day going to look like to get this out to some of those families who may be on the fence or may not be aware of what we're offering, and see what happens. Like I really truly believe that any of the families that are having their kids go anywhere, Marshfield Rapids, because of the convenience of it's just easier for me to drop them off up there every day. I don't know how this wouldn't be enticing to them as an option to keep them here. And I go back to the original plan behind this is not because this is what's easiest for families or most convenient, because it's what's best for our kids. It's what's best for the kids to have that consistency and have this available for the families. So next, I think it's just questions. Yeah, is it?
I get nothing.
That's the end.
That's the end.
Okay, I know I covered a lot in a short amount of time, but feel free to ask questions, and the ones we can't answer, I'll be transparent about that. We're still kind of waiting to get some definitive numbers before we make any.
So I just want to verify, Linda is okay with going 5 days?
Correct. Matt, do you want to talk about that?
No, I talked to her last week and she is on board with that. Talking to Mrs. Kramer too about getting that additional license. She's also on board with that as well.
So if registration is available Tuesday, March 7th, doesn't that kind of mean we have to make a decision tonight?
Well, this is not a vote. This isn't a vote, as I indicated in my Friday communication. This was informational. The
Right.
4K programming has been approved. This would be a programming change.
So
like
you
we
don't
just-
have to approve.
You don't have to approve this.
Okay.
The piece, Julie, that you would approve as a board is, Mandy just asked the question, is the fiscal component of it would be Linda's contract going from a 0.8 to a 1.0. And that would be a part of our budget that we're gonna bring in June, when we bring the board of budget. And it won't be like there'll be a specific line item, that it's part of what we will build our budget that we will bring to you, and that will be built within the budget, the constraints of the budget.
And that'll only, you won't know that till you have the final numbers. If there's only 15 students, you probably won't need that.
Yeah, no, we will. Remember we talked about the consistency piece is we need her here 5 days a week. We want to have her here for that afternoon available. So no, we know already with going with the 5 days a week, whether we have enough, like we want to have that. She needs to be available in the afternoons, because what will happen is she will be able to do, like when they do their recess or do those components, is you'll have that extra person able to do things so that Todd is able to have some prep time. When they're going to specials, they'll go to specials, they'll go to other areas. Todd would be able to have his prep time to do some of that family outreach time during that time and stuff. But Linda, the plan is to have Linda go full-time for the 5-day. That won't be contingent on, if the numbers go up. That would be in this current format, that's the one component where there's a fiscal impact, would be Linda going, and we do have a pretty firm number on that right now, because we already know there won't be an insurance impact because there's already the insurance. So it's a good question.
If the numbers weren't gonna talk to another person. Like if you got a higher number than expected. Of registrations, so if you got like 35 people.
I never say never, Nate, but I would tell you I'm very confident right now in saying, for the reasons I just expressed earlier, looking at some of our other numbers, is that if we had to sit and take a look, if those numbers got to that point, we have options available with existing staffing that I would not be anticipating unless it was like, if our numbers get up to 50, which I'll tell you what, then we'll be having there'll be an impact, a positive impact revenue-wise because of that would be a whole different story, right? I don't know the last time we had a class of 50. We've had a couple that were 40. The kindergarten class has got 41 in it right now. So it's not out of the possibility, but we have the ability to do some restructuring with existing staff based upon enrollment numbers at those primary levels.
So the registrations is basically open like all summer, right? It's
Yep.
never restricted.
Correct.
We're getting registrations already for 4K.
Yep. I think we have a handful already up.
How many extra do you normally see after the budget time?
I would say it's spread out throughout the summer. I mean, you have some families that make that decision late, some that make it as soon as they possibly can.
Yeah, we had a few just like the last minute last year. Nate,
And
what?
you're not talking about adding any staffing, just reallocating the staffing we currently have.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
But we're so far from needing, I mean, that's why I was just asking if we even needed to increase.
That would be a
numbers, 'cause
really
right
good
now-
problem to have, Julie.
Right now,
if we
we're
got
only
that
hearing,
problem.
we only think we have 15 students, that's only 8 in one class and 7 in another.
No, that's
I'm
just
confident
one
to say-
class. Well, in the morning, we were saying.
I am confident to say that we'll have higher than the 15 is what the census data says we have available. I would think, Matt and Heather jump in, I'm confident to say we're gonna have more than that. If you were to ask me to put an educated guess, like where would we end up, 20 to 22 would be a number I would feel, knowing what we have right now, that would be a number I would anticipate. And then we would be talking 11 in each of the morning sessions.
So combine in the afternoon then.
They do.
And then Candace is not teaching.
Candace
in the
is not available in the afternoon right now because she supports her other primary students in the afternoon,
got
and
it.
that's the piece.
Oh, that, I was just like,
Yeah.
okay, that makes complete
Yeah.
sense. I thought she
And
was
that would
there.
be under the assumption all 22 would take the full day option. I've already had a couple folks say to me, the two in particular, that they have 4K kids coming in, they love the 5-day week option, didn't feel their kids are ready for full day type activities yet. I said, perfect, like, that's okay, it's what you feel like your kids are capable of. Now, whether they end up changing their mind when the time comes, because all the way up until, families could indicate to Matt on the phone and to Todd, yeah, we're gonna do the half-day option, and could they change their mind the week before school starts? And would we say yes? Yes, absolutely we would. But the number that we would have right now, plain just the law of averages, about if 22 are all of them. So if we do get to that 22 number, if all of them were to take the full day option, I don't think that's statistically likely that you would get all 22 to do that. Who knows? It could happen. And then, we would have Todd and Linda available for the afternoon. We don't have Candace for the afternoons available because of other support. However, with the nature, when we talked about doing specials and doing enrichment activities, there's nothing that says they all have to go to the same spot at the same time, if that makes sense, to the same time before. There's some structure. That isn't a tipping number for us to say that we are out of opportunities, we don't know what to do with them. But we just won't know. The one thing I can tell you, I know there's a lot of unknowns. I would love to give you all definitive answers on all this. Believe me, it would be easier if I could say this is what's gonna happen. What I do know is, I said earlier, when we know better, we do better, and that the 2-day a week, if we were to talk about, are we doing everything we can to prepare our kids with that consistent, the answer is no. Like, it wasn't a decision made on it was made fiscally at the time, and I can't blame them because that was a major budgetary component back then. We have some options available now that we feel like we can meet the needs of our students and be fiscally responsible and, give our families choices, so. So Julie, more or less, this was just a kind of an informational thing. I wanted the board to, that transparency, like I wanted you all to know, in the community to know, I plan on communicating this in Friday's family communication to families, to kind of talk about the rationalization for the options and taking feedback from families, as we go through this process.
I just wouldn't want anything to stop you from being able to communicate. If someone's gonna register, it'd be nice to know what you're registering for.
Yep.
So I just didn't want to have a barrier in the way for you there.
I feel very comfortable right now. We can tell them that, listen, you're registering for full day, option for half day, 5 days per week, and you can pick either one of those options right now. I feel very comfortable with that. And we will pivot if the numbers start getting off the charts. Then we'll take a look at that staffing component, because that's still part of the discussion Heather and her team are going to be having related to all those primary levels, looking at those numbers and looking at groups moving up. And you heard me mention one thing that's where you're talking about, it's not there's an impact, a Peter Paul impact, right? Is that if we hold kids back that do 4K, and that's going to reduce the kindergarten numbers. Like right now, we have 26, right? If all of them went up, if 4 of them stayed in 4K, that would be 22 kindergarten kids. Right now, we have 3 kindergarten teachers, 3 first grade teachers. Now, I don't want people to go running around, everybody going hair on fire now, but that's the reality. I mean, staff know that, but they know we have to look at our resources that we have, and we have to allocate our resources where the needs are. So we have flexibility to look at, if we have numbers that come in at a high rate, then we have the ability to take a look at some other options.
What would you say to a family if they came to you and said, my older 2 kids went through this, and we're set up to do it the way it's always been done? Would they have that option to do just like the Tuesday, Thursday, or whatever, however they've done it in the past? Or is it, we're gonna do that this way?
That would not be an option. If they were enrolling, we would want them to come for
One of the 2 options.
one of the 2 options, yeah. That is true. Yeah, that option would no longer be on the table to do the 2 full days. And, and I would certainly listen to them and hear what their concerns were. And I would be we're willing to talk to anybody about what their specific situation involves. But I have a feeling like, just listening to some of the folks that I've talked to now that had concerns initially, one of the concerns, and we were responsive to people's concerns, is Todd had brought a family's concerns to us right off the bat and said they really don't want afternoons. Like they don't want afternoons. Now, I could argue that there is no statistical research that indicates there's a drop off in what kids would learn. It's all about the duration and the play-based piece, right? However, that's a real concern that family has. So when we put this planning together and say, all right, how can we get everybody mornings if that's what they want? Well, this was the plan that we were able to come up with. So even though, at the time it was like, well, there's not really, well, this is real. This is what this family is feeling. Is there a way we can do this? And the answer is yes, and we feel like we came up with that. So that family, I would certainly be willing to sit down. We would talk to them and find out what their concerns are, because there may be some folks who are like, you know what, my kids go to grandma or grandpa in the afternoon, the grandparents really want to see them. Then I would say is, the afternoons are certainly still a viable option if the grandparents want to see them in the afternoons. And if they only want to do it certain days of the week, then PCC would be an option. Like the one thing we don't want to do just for consistency for Todd in the afternoon and Linda is to say, well, you can bring them Tuesdays and Thursdays, full days. It's got to be one or the other. However, Tabitha has already said for those families who are like, listen, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I want my kids to be able to go with grandma and grandpa in the afternoon. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Tabitha will get them in to BCCC for the afternoon. So we have all those options available. And that would come from sitting down and talking with people. Finding out, what do you need? What are your concerns? And we work with them. Found that open usually.
That was sort of the question. Nobody's
I've
heard that.
I wouldn't be shocked if
Right,
it comes.
because I think that would be the biggest change if you've had kids that do it one way and now you're doing it another way. It would be harder for people to adjust to. Well, it's your first experience, it's your first experience.
I feel really confident, Nate, if we lay things out for folks, which is why we're willing to have those conversations individually. Like if we just don't say, here's the rationalization why we're doing this, lay something out. I think most people, even though that's kind of what they were used to or they were thinking, they're gonna be like, all right, that makes sense to me. Like I think ultimately people will be able to look and say, I may not love it, but I probably can learn to like it. Change is difficult. It really is. Like the easiest thing to do, it's why we don't see a lot of change in education. The easiest thing to do is just do the status quo and kind of go along and not rock the boat a little bit. And now the opposite side of that is there are districts that change for the sake of change, right? Which is, that's got all kinds of hazard signs written all over it. It's finding that balance of do what's best for kids and then try not to change all the time. Like just to try to stay consistent. Julie talked about that earlier. We feel like this is a sustainable plan and that we have the resources to pivot if we need to with the numbers going up.
Okay, anything else?
Thank you for your patience. I know this was kind of a marathon of a presentation.
All right, we'll move to the consent agenda items, which are meeting notice certification, the regular minutes from January 9th, financial status, spring curricular contracts, resignations and retirements, and hirings.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll abstain.
I'm sorry.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed? And Chris abstained. Motion carried. Okay, we'll move to discussion action. We will get to the CLA audit presentation. Thank you for being patient with us.
Good evening. It's been a while since I presented to you guys, so I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Amber Danielski. I'm the signing director with CLA. I've been with CLA or Shank since 2005, solely working on governmental audits, school districts in summer, cities, counties, municipalities, in the other parts of the year. This is my first year back on the audit after a few years. I was on it more in the early 2010s through 2015-ish maybe, and then just rotated back on this year. I'm gonna briefly go through a couple pages in the financial statements, not all 80 pages, but just a handful of certain numbers. But if you want a page just past the table of contents, there's the independent auditor's report. And I want to point this out for a couple different reasons this year. One, the layout is a little different because there's new auditing rules that went into effect for the 21-22 fiscal year. And so it's a little bit different if you would, for some reason, have last year's out, we have this year's. But then it also just talks about what our audit opinion was. And that's actually the first thing now in this new layout. And so we audit your governmental activities, your major funds, and then all the smaller funds that don't quite meet that category. As a whole, we audit those as well. And as a result of our testing, we found that your financial statements present fairly. So what that means is it's a clean opinion. We didn't find anything materially misstated that wasn't ultimately fixed or just was misleading in representation, whether it's the footnotes or the schedules in here. It is what the district strives for every year as part of your audit. The next couple parts of the letter talk about what standards we follow. So we cover governmental auditing standards, plus regular audit standards, and then DPI has a whole bunch of other things that we gotta follow. And then as well this year, because you spent over $750,000 of federal funds, you had a federal single audit. And I'll touch base on that a little bit later, and discuss what programs we tested and the results of that testing. Then if you wanna move to page 8. This is the balance sheet as of June 30th, 2022. And you'll see there's certain funds broken out here, and then you have other governmental funds, which is all your smaller funds laid out here. So your general fund, which is the first column on the left there with the numbers, you had just about $3 million in total assets. The majority was cash and investments, tax receivable, which you got in August, from the August settlement, and then about $600,000 of receivables from DPI. A lot of that's your grant funding that was coming in after the year end. You had total liabilities of $940,000. The majority of that was due to other funds. The way the cash balances work, that was amounts that are just due to food service donations that are just held by the general fund to help process the checks and pay for the activities, and this cash comes in. Then your total fund balance for the general fund was $2,135,000. And you'll see that that's broken down into a couple different components. So you have your non-spendable, which is $265,000. That's prepaid items. So that's like health insurance paid in June for July, or property insurance paid ahead of time, those kind of things. Basically means it's already been spent. You can't really consider that it's money that's available to be used. Your restricted amount of $20,000, this is when somebody outside the district gives you money and says, you can only use it on X, Y, and Z. So this year, that's where that Get Kids Ahead grant could be, or just unspent common school library funds, end up in that category. Then assigned, those are, you have $222,000 in there. And that's to be carryover purchase orders, various projects that you just want to put money aside towards and will be spent later. And then unassigned, that's the amount that hasn't been set aside by anything. Basically, it's your cash flow kind of thing. You have $1.6 million there. Your policy requires you to be at 20% of the next year's budget expenditures to maintain your cash flow purposes, and you did meet that requirement. And then there's a schedule further back that kind of shows what the calculation would have needed to be for that. Any questions on your general fund balance sheet?
Do you know where that is?
It is
Like how much we exceeded it by?
about 500,000.
Thanks.
It's page 47. Your debt service fund, you had $181,000 in fund balance at the end of the year to use for upcoming debt payments. Your long-term capital improvement trust, your fund 46, you had $481,000 in fund balance restricted. And again, once again, that's what DCAS says that you can only spend on that qualifies in your 10-year capital improvement plan. And then your other capital projects fund, which was for obviously the really big capital project that had been going on, there was only $80,000 left at the end of the year to spend on remaining projects now. Your other governmental funds, that's gonna be your food service, community service, those kind of funds, and at the end of the year, you have $600,000 in fund balance for those funds. Moving then to page 10, this is your income statement for the year for these funds. So the general fund had just about $8.8 million in total revenues, primarily your property taxes, your state aids, and also those ESSER funds was making up a big chunk of that, $850,000. Your total expenditures were just about $9 million, again, spent primarily in instruction and support services, which is where you would expect the majority of those expenditures to be. And then you transferred out some funds to the Capital Improvement Trust and debt service, and so you ended up decreasing your fund balance in general fund by about $280,000, ending at that $2.1 million. And as you can see there, your debt service, you spent a little bit there as well, and you spent a little bit out of your fund 46, and as I mentioned before, there was $2.4 million in that other capital projects fund when you were spending down the proceeds from the previous year. Any questions on your balance sheet here? Or sorry, excuse me, income statement. If not, there's more, if you're interested, like there's budget to action stuff on page 50, if you wanted to see, in particular, Fund 10 and Fund 27, if you're interested to see where that ended up. One new thing this year, for 21-22, there's a new accounting rule regarding leases that went into effect. The district had to analyze various agreements, and after analyzing it, there was basically one that needed to be set up, and that was for copiers and printers. And the information on that is on page 30. So basically, there's a liability of $42,000 set up now based on the way that rule works. It's meant to kind of show you, okay, so you're entering into this agreement. These are what you're projected, what you've agreed to for payments for the next 4 years until the agreement ends. Obviously, you can change if all of a sudden you add more printers onto it, or have to swap something else out, but just to give you a projection of what the district has committed to for this agreement for the next 4 years. Any questions on that? So you guys, a lot of the smaller districts didn't have a whole lot. There was others that had more, and at the end of my presentation, I'll talk to you about the next rule that'll have a bigger impact on these numbers. Then if you want to move to, where's my page? Page 74. This is called the Schedule of Findings and Question Costs. This summarizes a majority of our testing kind of in one page. It talks about your financial statements and whether or not we issued an unmodified opinion and what kind of, do we have findings? And as I'm sure John has talked to you guys in the past, there's been some findings. Your small district, you have 1 or 2 people that can handle all the activities, so there's your segregation of duties finding, which is your material weakness. And then there's the financial statement prep finding. For cost benefit purposes, the district requires us to complete about 70 of the 80 pages in here. And it's not unusual for small districts, even some bigger districts hire us to do that. But it's important to understand that your review of those statements, Pam's review of them before it gets issued, is an important part of making sure accurate data is presented. And that, as I noticed here, we also said there was no non-compliance material in financial statements that we found. Then because of the federal single audit, we had to test 40% of your federal expenditures during the year. So in order to do that, we had to test food service and your ESSER money. And as a result of our testing, we didn't have any compliance findings in regards to that. And we follow, the feds have various different things we have to look at, from procurement to, when food service is normal, we have to look at eligibility processes and different stuff like that. So, and it's on a sample basis, but like I said, the testing didn't result in any findings for those programs. Then, the next page, the state requires us, when we have a federal single audit, the state requires us to test a little bit more. We only have to test your special ed and general aids this year. No findings in what we tested there either. When you're not a federal single audit, DPI still makes us test a little bit of the same stuff, but usually not too extensively. And again, none of those testings resulted in any findings.
So both of the yeses under number 2 is just segregation of duties.
It's segregation of duties and the financial statement prep.
Sure.
And they're in more detail on page 76 and 77. But again, that's where it's important to have your oversight in and reviewing everything. Any questions on that before I kind of go into the new accounting rule and just kind of what the district needs to be looking forward to in this next school year? Okay, so for the 22-23 fiscal year, the new accounting rule is based on subscription-based IT arrangements. So think about softwares that you pay for licenses for. So what the way the accounting rule says is, because again, sometimes you enter into those agreements for 3 years, 5 years, you have to kind of account for them as a liability on your government-wide statements, your full accrual statements, and report that out. And so what we're recommending to districts to do is start working with your IT director, start working with pupil services, anybody that might have some sort of software, potentially, even your accounting software, potentially could be considered. Now, if it's a truly year-to-year thing, you don't have to do an extra accounting for it. But if it's something where really you're paying for the right to use somebody else's software by having 15 licenses for the next 5 years, it's gonna have to be accounted for differently. And because of the nature of what schools do, there could be lots of fees between the school library, curriculum, anything, even just, various IT stuff. Like I said, Skyward, different stuff like that, that's important to start researching it now, because then whatever you find, there needs to be some present value calculations and other things that go into it. And I'm sure DPI will want those numbers reported to them, just like they like the leases reported to them this year. So, again, those payments change, and like when it comes to budget time, instead of having those kind of like in the curriculum expense accounts like you're used to, those payments get broken down into principal and interest now, just like that. So it's a change. So again, that's why I wanted to make sure I mentioned it, so you guys have time to start identifying and pulling those agreements together and figuring out the way the district wants to approach that accounting for these before the next audit.
So 2 questions. It's just software though, so it's not other contracts.
No, it's subscription-based IT stuff.
And number 2, is there a way, I'm not sure that the district could, but in the future, is there a way around it by having an out clause that,
Yeah.
so at some level that you're agreeing to something on an annual basis, maybe you sign a 3-year contract, but you, at every year, like, so if you created something like that, you could get around it.
Yeah, if it's short-term, or, truly perpetually, annually kind of thing, then it doesn't count. What most districts are kind of looking for is, okay, what really is your cost benefit side? Are you saving enough by signing up for a 5-year deal? And so it's still just better long run to still do it that way versus, how well can you work with your vendor to do it short term? But yeah, if there's a way for both parties to get out with kind of just giving notice within, 60 days of year end, then it doesn't get picked up. Just the same thing with the leases. If you had some sort of agreement where you were leasing property and both sides could get out within 60 days, even though it's a 10-year agreement, you wouldn't have to track it, at least not for this kind of purpose. And that's all I have, unless you guys have other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, have a good night.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
All right, so 4-year-old kindergarten change to school day, I'm assuming we have already
We have,
extensively addressed.
we have, so, what I would tell you is I plan on, I will bring an update in March, not nearly as long. Got my word, but we should have some more clarity. So I will bring another update in March.
Mandy, can we get a motion for the audit to approve it?
Oh,
Absolutely, we can have a motion to approve the audit.
I move to approve the audit as presented.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Carried. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will move to items D and E, which are second readings of the policies 453.1 and 453.4.
I would just ask that, did all of you receive the clarification from, Mrs. Martinovich that I sent you? There were some questions related to those two policies. I think she did a good job of kind of explaining what that would look like in that process, so.
I move to accept the second reading and approve policy 453.1, emergency nursing services. Oh, I do two of them, yes. And policy 453.4.
A second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Next is first reading of new policy 453.13, cardiac arrest protocol.
So this,
I'm guessing this is a new policy.
it is a new policy,
So it's just something we didn't have and we
Correct.
took WASB's recommendation.
it is verbatim.
It is pretty self-explanatory, it looks like. Any comments, changes, discussion? Are we okay with moving that one forward for a second reading?
Yes.
Okay, then we'll move to first reading of new policy 177, cancellation of school board meetings.
And I read that the same way, we just didn't have one.
Correct.
So we took. I have no further questions.
Any other questions, comments, discussion? Are we okay with moving that one forward?
Yes.
Okay, next is first reading of updates to policy 322, school day.
So these changes will be something that you will see as we go through policy review. Recommendation is always to remove specific examples with times, dates for obvious reasons. You can see under the struck portion up above that it's scheduled by the administration off the various educational events. When you put specific times in, it requires policy changes to make changes to the school day, including, if we were to look at, running on snow days, if you were to extend the school day and stuff. This just more or less encompasses, here's the mandatory hours, it's within the realm of administration to create a schedule that is at the greatest educational advantage. So
I like these changes.
Well, especially since the hours weren't correct.
Yeah.
I only have one
minor
question.
details.
There's just a statement in it that wasn't included above, that scheduled hours may include hours on Saturdays. And I'm just curious, like, would we really ever have what does,
Would we? No, but
No, but if you
it's a
needed
rec-
to make time up for a week off or something, it just gives you the option.
that would be like option F. Right. I think that was part of WASB's recommendation to include, so, yeah. That would be, Julie, I can't think of a scenario where that might happen, but it's in there in the event that we needed it.
All right, any other questions, comments, discussion? Are we okay with moving that policy forward for a second reading?
Aye.
Okay, we'll move that one forward. Next we'll do the AGR report.
All right, quick update from the elementary school. So every year, to get our age year funding, grades K through 3 set goals in math and reading. And the teachers create these goals, and they are to be 100%, simply because we want to reduce the gap. So teachers set those. They can change them at any time. There's no changes this semester. And as you can see, they are making progress on their goals. I think the one area that might be a little bit lower would be first grade right now. However, first graders make a lot of gains in the spring, so it's not of any concern right now. And then, as Jason said earlier, we can choose 3 different strategies to use for AGR. We really try to use the class size, and we have for all the classes except 3rd grade. Just one section of 3rd grade is we are using the instructional coaching strategy this year. And that would be in Mrs. Niehouse's section. And just, I got a little feedback from her because it's our first time that we've used instructional coaching for AGR. And she just said it's a really great opportunity to reflect with the instructional coach and learn different strategies specifically for reading she's working on. So other than that, we are on track and working on the goals.
Yeah, looking at some of the first grade scores, it is a little concerning, but there is progress. And the children that are in first grade right now were in 4K or 5K when we had the COVID shutdown. 4K. Okay.
Heather, you talked about first grade showing a lot of growth in the spring. Being a lifelong primary person, what would you attribute that to? Why first grade, why spring?
I think they get the momentum of guided reading especially, and so then I think just with experience and practice, they increase their skills.
I only asked that because I know when you pointed out that those scores aren't particularly alarming because staff traditionally see that, and I knew there was some rationalization behind why. So, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so we will move on to the State Academic Excellence Scholarship recipient for the class of 2023.
I need to beg forgiveness. I should have brought this at the beginning. We were not ready for that. There's conflicts in who can get their award based on what their career plans are, and the students have to have career plans for that to be like the next step plans.
Okay.
So I need to put it in March for both of those awards.
Rod, did I miss that? Did you request that from me?
I think I left it hanging because I was on duty on Friday and you were, so I'm very sorry about that.
Well, I would have felt that. I was trying to take one for you.
Currently, the same student is the choice for both, and they can't go to both the next school and the 4 year. So the student needs to choose like your life in the next one.
So that we can fund it.
No pressure.
So the right state of Wisconsin can fund it, yeah.
Well, because you have to have alternates, because if the person doesn't choose a school in Wisconsin, that will go to that alternate person. I don't miss being part of those processes because they get pretty contentious at times.
Okay, so we will table those
Everything.
for next month. So we'll move to the January 13th pupil count.
So you can see the information in front of you from the second Friday count. I think I articulated earlier in the meeting that we had 3 open enrollment ends just in the last week. And I believe this is Friday, we had a resident transferred, the person moved in the junior high level. So these numbers fluctuate. They're based upon 3-year rolling averages, so that, to kind of allow things to kind of even out and stuff. But these are numbers we do look at. Certainly, it's something that we pay close attention to, specifically when we're looking at the primary grades, looking at sizes. This goes into play when we're talking about when we approve open enrollment limits at grade levels and those things, and try to project like how many students could we take, and knowing that we have to take any folks that live or move in the district. So
Is the September count though the count that actually pays us
over
the January count? Like, does the January count matter from mean, isn't it the September Friday count that actually determines
That
our
ends up
funding?
on our revenue limit.
Yeah.
There are adjustments for January though, so there are some monies that we could potentially get depending on the status of certain students in January.
But we
But
would
the
lose them
main
because it
money-
went down a little.
Right, so our 3-year rolling average for FTEs and membership is on the September count.
So that's favorable from September being higher. Well, maybe not.
Traditionally, our January count is a little lower than September,
Yeah,
it
almost
is.
every year.
Okay,
And I would anticipate we're gonna get a handful of kids here yet to the end of the school year too, that we'll see kids coming in too.
I would have really liked this as part of it.
yeah, that's true.
Thank you, Dr. Watson, for that help.
I'll make the motion to approve the count of 559 students in attendance for the January 13th, 2023 pupil count.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Next, we'll look at a possible agenda date for the April 10th, 2023 school board meeting.
So we wanted to bring this up early because we obviously want to kind of plan out what things may look like. That is the week of spring break, the scheduled one. So we just wanted to allow the board time to discuss if we wanted to look at a date change for that meeting. And Pam, I know you had there was a conversation about if we moved it forward. Did you and I not have, did you have a preference
If
for
you do
anything?
move it forward, there won't be financials. It's physically impossible because they don't even have
timing.
any statements till that Monday.
So if it's earlier,
If you're okay not getting them, I mean, I can do a very draft without reconciling any bank accounts, but you would not have a full one like you did now.
so if we wanted that, we'd want to push it back a week.
Well, I'm not going anywhere for spring break.
I'm not either.
I'll be here. I'll be here too.
I'm not going anywhere.
You don't go?
Nope.
Well, I don't think if you're not going anywhere if your dad's not.
Well, maybe then we would.
I'm going for it.
Yeah.
And I would certainly like to be flexible with my administrative team if they did have plans over that timeframe. But certainly I will be here and all of you guys will be here. I think we can stay with the date.
Okay. So it doesn't sound like there's a need to change. Is that the consensus? Okay, so then we'll look at the early release update for 23-24.
So effectively, I had talked about this in my Friday communication, so we would need to approve this prior to the calendar approval because just trying to briefly talk to you about the process we went through with the calendar committee. We met 4 times. We had discussions within that committee that centered around those professional learning days that we wanted to build in throughout the year. The suggestion was brought up and it was embraced by the entire committee to say that in order to be sensitive to our families, having an early release day and a full day professional learning day where students would not be in session in the same week was a big ask. And it would make more sense if we were to roll those into Friday. And actually, a lot of the feedback we got in our calendar survey, there were 5 or 6 mentions of the early release time. And I had asked Sam his perspective as an individual, as an athlete, about what those Wednesday days look like, and what would it look like if it was a Friday for you. And Sam had responded that would be a little more favorable to him because a lot of times those are competitions, so you wouldn't have to hang around for a practice right after school. That you'd have a little more time you could leave school on those early release days. And also the thought would be, if you're a family and you want to do a little weekend getaway, you want to get an early start. If you get off work early, if you're done at 2:05 on a Friday rather than a Wednesday. I know there were conversations related to saying like, what's that going to look like? Kind of returns are going to get at Friday. Well, the thing is, we're professionals and we're the adults, and it's what you put into the time, not the day that it happens. And we're pretty confident that the calendar committee is pretty confident. Dr. Watson, I know you were going to communicate with the Guiding Coalition. Do you want to share any feedback that you got?
Yeah, you never want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. We know that when we planned this last year, that the districts that are doing PLCs really, really well are going Wednesdays because brains are still on, people are still full speed. Fridays you kind of taper off a little bit. But it's also true for students, to be honest. I mean, like, who's most productive at 2:00 on Friday afternoon? And so we are going to release students, if this plan, if you approve this, we release students on Friday afternoon. The adults, being professionals, paid to do this, will power through and have productive conversation on a Wednesday afternoon. Because that was a concern, right? Like you're meeting, you're also kind of 1 foot into the weekend. However, we thought, and the guiding coalition agreed, I didn't get anybody that felt otherwise, that having students go home early on Wednesdays and then have the whole day on Friday off just seemed like a really odd week. So then we have those professional days, see in the calendar, is that part of the agenda is to have those collaborative conversations in that database, learning as part of that day. And so we actually get quite a few student instructional minutes back with this plan. So that's kind of right. I mean, it's the same thing we give people. That's why we don't do a late start instead of an early release, right? It's because people that have done this, districts that have done it, have not found that productive because teachers have 1 foot in the lesson plan they're about to do instead of into the conversation. But this is the best way to maximize the calendar as far as we saw it, and none of the guiding coalition was clear.
So can we see the count, like, can we have a paper copy? Do you have a paper copy of the calendar? No?
I didn't
It's
do
just not
paper
in
copies.
Is
They're,
it your email?
It was an email.
yeah, it's in the email, and then Deb's gonna bring up copies on, you should be able to click on it. But maybe I can answer a question, Julie. Both models incorporate the Friday component into those, full day PLDs, and that would be the once per month. The reason for moving all of them is we just felt the consistency, right? That's only gonna be once per month and not every month, because there were some months where in the one calendar, we didn't build the PLD in because it was a very short month to begin with. And we didn't feel like taking an instructional day away from a month that only had 19 days in was beneficial. But we wanted to build those in, and the significance of those full day PLDs, they were front loaded in the previous calendars. We had 8 of them in the beginning. You'll see both calendars have them 3 and 3 in those 2 week periods prior to the students coming back, which is the idea behind 3-day chunk, allow people to still get away, kind of, it's one of those last weekends before students come back for staff and their families too. And you would be able to get a lot done. However, we were able to put some of those days during the year because we have a stretch. There was quite a couple of periods of stretches where we really, if there were things we wanted to more or less address in large groups with staff, we didn't have those days. We had 2 days built in, and they were so far apart. When you really want to talk about being able to implement, whether you're working in extended periods with your vertical teams or your horizontal teams, having these days built in for the administrative team to be able to kind of, and honestly, there's value in bringing all staff together. We've heard that. We've had a few opportunities this year to get all staff together for like a breakfast and a lunch. We received tons of positive feedback from staff high school staff saying, we don't get to spend a lot of time with our KA colleagues very often, or just have us all get together to kind of talk about those big picture mission things. And one thing we've talked about as a team is we have a lot of very talented staff in this district, and we've been sending people out to be trained, is being able to set up a format where our folks that are trained can work with staff within the district, and we can set up trainings within the district with our own people, or bring in resources from CISA, which we have. Matt, 7 days is our CISA contract, Pam?
So
CISA, as part of our contract with CISA, they give you 7 professional learning days that you can kind of cater to your needs, where they will either send someone here or work with our people for 7 days on various formats and stuff. So we're just looking at those as being very valuable. And to be honest with you, they're timed at periods where end of term, and it gives kids kind of a break just to kind of reset before you're starting your new classes coming in. Same thing with staff to be able to kind of close. That's the reality. Is there what I say to you about that is like essential to, yeah, because there's something to be said about a teacher being able to finish up and close that, get their grades and their assessment done, and then be able to come back and ready to go that next day. So they were very strategic where these days were placed throughout the year, and we were excited about having the opportunity with either calendar that's approved by the board to be able to sit down and then come up with a plan for what those days are going to look like. So the component that would need that approval would be the change to that Friday prior to approving either one of the calendars. Now, if the board were to feel very strongly about not moving that to Friday, we would have to table the calendars because we'd have to go back and we would have to move effectively the days to Wednesdays is what we do, because we feel very strongly, out of deference to our families, is not having 2 separate days. We want to.
But my question is,
Why do you answer this days on Wednesdays?
we have on the short calendar, the short break.
Yep.
No,
Well, on
sorry,
the
the
long
long
break.
break. on the long break, there are 2 in-services on
Yeah.
Wednesdays.
Those were specifically because the timing of where those ended were on terms, and that was the exception, end of term. So what would have happened is you would have came back, you would have had 2 days of another term and then a professional learning day. So it was all about the timing of the term. That was the committee probably spent the majority of the last meeting discussing those specific components. Todd, you want to elaborate from the teacher side? I know that discussion about the timing of those 2 days, both from the junior high level, from the elementary level and the high school level, they felt very strongly about the timing of those 2 days.
Yeah, we just didn't want to have a couple days and then go back and do grade. Like everybody said, we'd have to have them done anyway by then, so it was not.
Or the students would take a day off and come back with 2 more days of the same class in that term.
But my question is, doesn't that defeat the rationale of moving it to a Friday? If we're gonna have Wednesday in-services, like half of our in-service days are on
Right.
Wednesdays and half are on Fridays. Are we not kind of shooting ourselves in the foot?
I think there was two in that calendar.
So there's
but
2
2
Wednesdays and 2
Fridays.
Fridays.
Yeah.
So I
Yes.
feel like, okay,
So January and March.
Because originally those were on Fridays in that draft, and then that was a big point of discussion with staff.
well, and I completely understand where they're coming from, but our rationale for moving to Fridays is that we're not gonna have the weird day where they're with an early release and an in-service
Yep.
day, and it kind of ends up that way anyway.
And I would feel like, and that's a very valid point to bring up, and I would feel like this, if it was communicated, and that would be our responsibility, communicate to families why in that situation that was done in those. I think even from a student point, that would make sense of why those days would occur there at the end of the terms, if that makes sense.
I'm not real crazy, yeah. Okay, I'm looking at it from the family's perspective.
Mhm.
And, okay, the kids are gonna go to school for 2 days, and then they're gonna have a day off, and then they go to school again. This is particularly, to me, problematic in March. Well, yeah, January for sure, yeah, but also March. Now I'm looking at the calendar, the full spring break calendar, okay?
Deb, can you bring that one up, please?
So I understand here, we're looking at both of these at the same time, and I know you really wanted to do the one before the other, but I don't feel like we can do one without talking about the other.
I'm fine
So
with,
you're talking about
Yeah,
both these ones at the
I'm
same
fine
time.
with looking at both of them.
So if I'm looking at the full week of spring break, what I see in March of 2024 is kids go to school for 2 days, they have Wednesday off, they come back for 2 days, and then you have spring break.
Yep.
To me, that seems really crazy for families.
Well, and I can tell you, a lot of people are gonna take their kids because,
Yeah, they're just gonna leave.
right, there's 2 days that, I mean, I feel like we're almost setting it up for families to.
Take a 10-day spring break.
And that's the first 2 days of a term, which are important.
Right, so you're gonna get 2 days of a term in
Mhm.
with assignments to then send them on spring break.
I'll be honest, I'm looking at it going, yeah, we could take 10 days.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely,
that's horrible, but
absolutely.
looking at it from, like, yeah.
I have a question with the PLCs. Now, if we're moving, are some people gonna lose their horizontal teams if you're partnering with other schools that do it on Wednesdays?
So we don't have a whole lot of synchronous meetings. I know of very few. Maybe Todd, you got one going on. They're almost all asynchronous.
Mine are all just email, because they all have Fridays off.
They don't, it's not common for districts to have the same early release, early start time we do. So they're really just checking each other's stuff online.
So we're kind of moving into the calendar thing here. I think we need to back up here a little bit on this Friday time.
Well, and I agree, but I'm
You can't
thinking,
do one without the other.
yeah, what I'm hearing is maybe there's some questions on that component prior to.
Well,
It's kind of,
If this is the calendar we approve, I wouldn't recommend changing Wednesdays. Because it's the exact same. It's two Fridays that you've added
Okay.
and 2 Wednesday in-services that you added. So we're I mean, again, not without extensive surveying of families for everybody to say, I wish it was on Fridays, please do that. We just changed to Wednesdays last year, asked this of families. They recreated their schedule to make it work. And there is no rationale with this calendar to say why we would change it up again. Because it's the exact same number of Wednesdays that they'll be off, that there's Fridays that you're adding.
So the only piece, and I'm not arguing with that rationalization, the only piece I would throw in is for families is that, and I don't know if that was the original intent last year, is that how we offered that any families who want their kids to stay, that we have a availability for kids to remain here at school, and we did for the entire year.
Right.
So that's the one piece, Julie, and I'm not gonna say I bristle when parents say like this is a major hassle for me, but we tell families, if you, and many take advantage of it, like kids stay here, that if it is, we wanted to make sure that we were helping families out with that we have options available for the kids to stay for that period. So I'm not saying that will change your mind on that concern, and I do understand your rationalization behind saying, like, if you approve the full week spring break calendar, what I'm hearing from you is to say, we're not going to approve just
If we approve this
don't make a
calendar,
motion.
the message for parents would simply be, we're changing to Fridays instead of Wednesdays. There's not the rationale of because of PLC days, because it's the exact same number of days. So our rationale would be because it's better for families and better for teachers in PLC learning Fridays. That would be the rationale.
Okay. And I keep thinking back to when the discussion took place last spring about PLCs. And I was kind of skeptical about the idea of having that release time on Wednesdays. But I remember the rationale was for our faculty is, okay, we're doing this on Monday, Tuesday, we're going to talk about things on Wednesday. And then you have an opportunity to maybe try new approaches or, implement things right away. And to me, that would seem really, as a former teacher, that rationale made so much sense. Where in this case, so you really convinced me of that, you guys, that was a good rationale. Because now it's like Friday, and yes, our teachers are professionals, but they're also humans. And to be able to then say, okay, I'm gonna do this on Monday, but then they go away for the weekend. It just seems like from a teacher learning perspective and how to improve things for our kids, I don't know, you really sold me on that rationale for Wednesdays.
Wednesday is probably the ideal time to do it. It's just a matter of when we started that conversation, all the PD days were built on Fridays and things that we've all since then. So,
Well, what about moving the two in-service days to Wednesdays?
Yeah, but then you've got a day off of school and.
I can tell you from a parent perspective, having a Wednesday off of school would suck.
Yeah, I agree.
But there's a whole bunch of them built in.
I know, but that's why I don't love that calendar. To be frank, I like the other calendar better. Because to be honest, a lot of people don't build their spring break plans around our spring break. It's been so inconvenient the last few years that people just take their kids when they're gonna take them. And we have 4 days with Easter that maybe when they choose to do it. I feel like from a parent perspective, having an hour extra on Fridays where my kids, we could maybe take off to go camping a little bit earlier or go fishing or something earlier. I like the idea of having an early release on a Friday from a parent perspective. I also like the idea that our in-service days are on the same day as our early release days. I don't love the idea of bouncing back and forth at all. And in the calendar that has the Friday in-service days, there is also one in October, which we never get. And that stretch is super long for teachers and for kids. That September, October, we don't get anything till that first part of November. That's a super long stretch. So I kind of like that there's an in-service day built in October. So there's a little bit of it, that ability to catch up for everybody in that time too.
Can you stand up on that?
I don't love the idea of bouncing around, and I really, really dislike the idea of a whole day off on a Wednesday for families. That is a nightmare for me to wrap my head around daycare and trying to plan, okay, who can I have that's not working somewhere else Fridays are a little bit easier because some people don't work Fridays, so it's a little easier for families. But from a parent perspective, that calendar where there's Wednesdays off is not ideal.
Well, ultimately, I mean, this whole PLC thing was put together as a critical, crucial investment in the student, right? So, I mean, we've got all kinds of different ideas about what we as staff think, or, you know, families, life situations. I mean, it's been less than a year that the decision was made to go forward with this PLC. And it was decided on the board that when different days were picked and discussed. At that time, Wednesday was in the middle of the week. And we felt that that would be the best time while staff is still engaged in the middle of the work week. They could grasp that, still stay engaged. Now, we're all human, and I'll tell you what, if I was a teacher, by Friday, I'd be exhausted. And you know the old saying, TGIF, I mean, if I know that students are going home an hour before the end of school on Friday, I'm gonna wanna be out of there too. So how much benefit are we gonna get from, I guess, staff? If in their mind, after a long work week, how is that gonna benefit our students better on a Friday than on a Wednesday when they're still engaged? Now, we've asked parents to make some big changes just going through this process that was created. Now, in less than a year, we want to have them make more changes. So, I don't know, I've been doing a little research on this PLC online, and I had the opportunity to talk to a superintendent from a nearby school. And, there's a lot of positive aspects to the PLC, but the biggest complaint was wasted time due to staff socializing and not staying on topic. So, being that you're giving them more of an opportunity to be done at the end of the week, when we got it on Wednesday, I think it's a student benefit. If we switch to Friday, I just think there's a higher likelihood for wasted time and socializing or being checked out for the week. And I can see a convenience that justifies the goal of improving student success. I would postpone it definitely.
Well, we have to have a calendar.
I know, but for the Friday.
Oh, okay.
Well, you just would, if the board was not comfortable with that, it would just be, you just wouldn't make the motion. And I would propose another option is to leave the early release days on the Wednesdays. Those can just stay because those aren't listed on the calendar. So
Right.
you can approve either of these calendars based upon how the calendars are right now. And take the early release day out of the picture, and the early release day in either of those scenarios, Chris, could then just remain. You just wouldn't make a motion. The board would not entertain a motion.
So
And if
Jason,
without entertaining a motion, it's in policy that is on Wednesdays at 2:05, that would just remain the same. And that was a 2-year, not having been here for the discussions in the spring with this, it was the board had made that as a
No,
2-year
it's policy, we'd have to have a new motion and to change that
at the
policy.
end of next year.
Yeah, that's right. We did say we were gonna try this for 2
It was
years.
a 2-year. Correct.
so
So-
Jason, one quick question.
Sure.
This year's calendar has 3 in-service days during the school year.
Yep.
So just to help me understand, I just have to find it here. Are we projecting? Sorry, just too
No,
many
that's okay.
tabs. Yeah, so
Both
there's
of these
3
calendars have two built-in snow days over the required hours. Both options do with the student contact days. There's 2 built-in snow days. I don't know if that's what you were.
No, so I'm just gonna go, it doesn't really matter which one. So we had 3, and now what's being proposed is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8. So what's getting proposed is 8 for in-service and the 2 PLC days. So,
Yeah,
so
and one of those was
This is
a
no
previous,
spring break.
what's that?
That's no spring break.
that's the most important
Yeah.
one.
The other one is,
That's why we do more in-service days, right?
yes, because there's less days.
See,
Because there's less spring break days.
Yeah, see,
So
what
count
I
out the
don't,
non-spring break
Okay,
ones,
that's
I think
helpful.
there's
Okay, there's one,
three additional.
2, 3, no, that's.
And one of those is the last day, it's after students are done,
Right, yeah.
the day after
which
Memorial Day.
we don't.
So there's 6.
No, I know.
So there's 6 instead of
Three.
3.
Yep,
So can I ask why, I mean, I get the 2 PLC days, like you're wanting to have those, but why is there an extra one? So why are we
Two.
going from 3?
two of those were taken from the front load, the front part, and one of them was a day, the one day that was no staff or students in February was turned into a professional learning day, so it would be, students would still have it off, but staff would use it as a professional learning day. We built it with the premise of wanting to be able to have at least one time every 30 days to be able to get together and work on those, those trainings that we talked about, and having where our teachers are running sessions for other staff, and administration is able to have meetings
Okay.
as a district. Does that make sense, Julie, or no?
Well, I'm just trying to explain it to, to a parent,
Uh-huh.
that would ask. So we have our PLC afternoons, whether that's a
Yeah.
Wednesday or Friday. And then I understand there's 2 more days you're building in, so teachers can collaborate.
Yeah.
But why is there also more in-service days? Like, so why are there, like, what's the rationale of putting that in the calendar year? And having, and in the one, it's just 1, and the
Yeah.
other, I suppose it's a couple because,
I'm sorry if
There's
I'm
not
being
spring
dense
break.
on this, because
I wish we had them
I'm,
side by side.
like, the goal was to try to, like, previously we had about, like, the one that, before there was one in October, it was like, there were 70 some days of school before we had our first professional learning. It was in November,
sure.
in November. Feeling like it came up multiple times as an administrative team, boy, it would be like, when is our next time where we can meet with staff and talk about some big picture thing, like talking about our, the learning targets and student assessment. And it was like, having one of those per month just made sense to be able to get together. If we were talking, the teams are meeting as vertical teams and horizontal teams, and their PLCs for those hour and 15-minute evenings. This is kind of the chance to bring everybody together and have those big picture type discussions and do those breakdown sessions and other types of things. And honestly, have staff, like when Heather's team went and did that visit to Marathon to review their Bridges math curriculum before doing that. When we have a team go on for a day, it's about $500 per teacher, between the cost of the teacher and a sub, like the combined cost to have someone out of the building with kids, and their teacher isn't there with the kids. So thinking that we could try to target those days where if staff wanted to go do a visit to another school district, those could occur during that day. It was a lot of flexibility for us to be able to do that professional learning throughout the year, rather than having those
So
long
it's-
stretches without the ability to get
Sure, so the
staff together.
So the calendar with the full week off,
Yep.
is February 23rd really a PLC day, not an in-service day?
So. Marianne, do you have yours up?
Well,
I guess
I wish we had paper copies in front of us,
This one.
because I'm toggling between the two, and
Well, I'll keep one up here if you guys want to look at.
The other because the other
That would be
in-services make
helpful.
complete sense, they fall when grades are due, right?
Yeah,
So is that one, like, what are they doing on February 23rd?
that February 24th or the 23rd historically was the day, and I'm told is tradition here. That's what I was told, is that's been the day off. Todd, you can help
I
me.
can tell you, when Dan Hahn owned the bus garage, that's state wrestling. And when we were coaching together, he had a lot of stress about leaving the buses running. He'd leave Bill in charge, somebody else in charge, and it was just very hard for him. So he negotiated, or he worked it out with the superintendent at the time that we would have a day there while he was, that.
And it's for all students and staff.
Yeah.
That was a day off. It's in this calendar this year. It was approved in this calendar. All we did was, Julie, was instead of making that a no staff student day, we said that would be an optimum day to use for one of our professional learning days, because we already wouldn't have students there. So it was preserving an instructional day, but giving us that day, that's why, and it was the February one. Does that make sense or no? That was why that day happened, was because of that, because it was, like, if you go back, I'm told 20 years, that third week in February was always a day off for staff and students, for that reason that Todd just articulated. So we just turned that into a staff in-service day instead of a no school day for all staff and students. So staff will still report, students would have it off just like they do this year.
Okay, so what we're doing is between the two calendars, the first calendar that Deb has up there is the one with the full week spring break.
Correct.
The second one has a long weekend for spring break. So what we're doing is we're trading spring break for more in-service days, is
And
kind of how I look at it.
Right, Wednesdays.
Teachers' contracts are 188 days.
88 days.
So they have to work 188 days.
Right.
So, and to be clear from before, one option, either of these options could be on the table with just tabling the motion and not making a motion for the Wednesday to the change, and it would just remain on Wednesdays. And either one of these calendars could be approved with that. I don't know if you want me to share the survey data. I did put all the survey data on here just I was gonna go through it with you. If you wanted me to go through that, I would with you. Both the preliminary survey that we used to kind of find out where the community was lying in the staff when building the calendars. And then, based upon that feedback, we felt like we built two calendars that checked a lot of those boxes. We then surveyed staff with these two calendars, because the reality is, you touched on it before, I think both of the folks did up here, like for those days for spring break. If families want to take, you can take a kid out for 10 days per calendar year. If families want to take 2 extra days and make it a 9-day spring break, they can do it like however they want to. They can choose to pull the kids out. Staff are kind of relegated to the schedule, which is why we surveyed. So just to be clear with you, that's why we didn't send a survey back out to families, because families have flexibility. We just wanted to give a feel of staff of these two calendars. What was your preference? We surveyed all staff, and it was 82% to 18% of staff preferred the full spring break week calendar. I just wanted to share that data with you, because
I would too if I was
Yeah.
staff. I mean, this should be-
because they don't have the flexibility of taking that 10 days with their kids off. So that's the reality of that piece. So
So I missed that, I pulled back up this year's calendar. The February 24th and April 7th are under the no school makeup, snow makeup
Correct.
day. So that's
We
what
got
I
rid of
missed.
those.
So that's why,
yeah,
so,
sorry.
so is the 24th a makeup day if we did it, like if we had too many snow days?
Well, here's what I would tell you. Any one of those staff development days could turn into a snow makeup day if we needed to, right?
Sure.
You know what I mean, in a pinch, but what we found is we still have 2 built-in snow days in this calendar. And although I don't believe the offline virtual learning is obviously the optimum
Sure.
source of instruction, we have some flexibility, and I have to think, having just moved back up here, that the 5 days this year was the exception and not the rule for what we typically see. Like this was a pretty extreme winter. So we're pretty confident that we wouldn't have to, and those 2 days, Julie, we didn't build those in
Got it.
as off days for staff. Once again, the families will still get that opportunity with those professional learning days. It's just that those 2 days off for staff now are professional learning days. So we built in the April day and the February day from last year's calendar are just professional learning days in those months for staff. Still would be off for families.
So do you feel?
Clear as mud, right?
Do you feel like potentially a compromise for staff as well as making this calendar work better for families would be the compromise of the full week spring break, but moving those 2 Wednesday in-service days to Fridays? Which simply means that, I mean, it's 2 instructional days, they'll need to start the term before they're finishing things up. And, I mean, I guess my thought is, maybe I'm like way off with this, but don't we make the rules? Can't we just give 2 extra days to get the grades in to send it, or is that like something that like, I mean, we make the rules, can't they just be done by the time they leave on that
Yeah.
Friday
Yeah.
and
Yes.
figure it out? I just, to take these days off on Wednesdays.
To be fair, I'll tell you, the answer is yes. What you would hear from a staffer, what they would say is that that's easy to say that you're gonna leave it, but we can extend the grading window to whatever we wanted to. We also can manipulate the term. We can change the timing. One of the other reasons for where we set up some of these things is for the high school specifically is making sure those terms were equal. You know, we got them all within like a day of each other. I think 43, 42, 43. That's important because if you have those term classes, and especially if you're thinking you might get hit hard in certain terms with weather and some you won't, is that if they get really imbalanced, that gets to be, and Rod's nodding his head because he knows that could be a huge problem at the high school to have terms off by, if you lose 3 days of one of those terms. So moving terms where they end would be really tough because it's pretty balanced. Moving the grading window, that's something we can do.
All it affects is like when you post honorable. That's
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm gonna throw out another really like radical idea that probably no one's gonna like, but I'm in possibilities here. I know that the community and the staff like the idea of students being done before Memorial Day. What if we were done by May 31st?
We're done by the 24th.
Yeah, that's the way it is right now, on the
Oh, yeah,
calendar
next
with
week.
no,
Oh.
I mean, I'm wondering theoretically, would families be willing to trade having a week, families and staff, having a week of spring break with having to come back after Memorial Day? Acknowledging the fact kids aren't gonna learn much, but
So you
that's the whole month of May.
So you move graduation from the 25th to the 1st?
Because that would be the big piece.
Okay, again, I hate
I'm
to
not
sound.
saying no, I'm clarifying what you're asking.
I'd rather be inconvenienced by doing Wednesday than finish after the holiday.
Oh,
For me, the no-go would always be if you have seniors graduate and the rest of the kids are still there,
Yeah.
that destroys your learning environment. But if we move graduation to the 1st, then, I mean, they have your
Well-
plan,
once upon a time, I think we did do that.
and it never worked.
Were you here in Pittsfield?
No, I mean, like, the
I
idea
was
of
as a student and it didn't work.
Okay. Well, I was here and
It did not.
I don't
it
think it-
destroys your learning environment
I
because
mean, the seniors are gone, so it's awesome, but it was at the same time, like, you didn't do a whole lot, especially if you had classes that had seniors in them. All of your learning had to be done before the seniors were done. So
Right,
you did, had study.
As the
Well-
principal of the building who had that for 5 years, everything you just said is true.
okay,
I would just say.
But I'm not saying you can't move graduation, I just want to be clear, asking.
yeah,
June
Yeah.
1st is when a lot of schools graduate, I mean, it's very common.
right.
What would be, so just to clarify for me, what would we gain, like, what would we gain from doing that? Because we don't need, like, we're 2 days over the instructional minute instructional hour requirement. Like, when you say that as a compromise, like, with the.
Well, why can't we in number 2 then, why can't we have a full week of spring break? If we've got the instructional hours in here, how? Maybe I'm just, I don't know, I'm a paper person.
Oh, I see what you're saying, in the non-full week spring break,
And the
like, to
non-full
get those
break,
days, that was where I
Get the
missed,
full
okay.
week and then
Right.
go 3 days the following week.
Right,
Well, one of the trade-offs, so you'll see a day that was added that was very popular in the survey from families and staff, was to have the Wednesday before Thanksgiving off. That was why that was built into both calendars, because that was one that, we looked for things in the survey that were like, yeah, these were like very popular amongst all parties. I would also tell you that the stuff, don't apply for a waiver, and the end by Memorial Day were 2 things that we saw strong support for those 2 things. So we really tried to build both calendars. We took those, what are those ones that it was very clear these had the strongest support, and those would be the 3 things. The week spring break, not week spring break, was about split overall with the community, but as from the staff perspective, it had very strong support for the reasons we just talked about.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't have that flexibility.
right. Well, and if I was staff
So we could we could entertain motions to make some of those changes to one of these particular calendars. You could absolutely make a motion to approve the calendar with, moving 2 of those days. And here's what the reality is, that is the board makes the ultimate decision here, and we will work within those parameters. So you have to be comfortable with what you're approving. We can make changes, like if those 2 days are days that you wanted to say, we want to move those days to Fridays, then we will make that work. If you want to make a motion to approve it with those 2 days moved to Fridays, we will make that work and leave professional learning, early release days on Wednesdays. That will work. That was done, and I am not kidding you, the conversation, that was done all in deference to families to say, like, we want to be conscientious of that stuff. That was the rationalization behind that. But I can also see what you're talking about is what Chris brought up about, this was something families had planned around and stuff. So that the calendar that you preferred, the one with the full spring, full week was just those 2 dates, you could table the motion for switching in depth, not to me if I'm even in the ballpark on this. They just wouldn't make a motion on the Wednesday, change from Wednesday PL day to Friday. And then someone can make a motion to approve that calendar with the 2 dates that were the Wednesdays moved to those Fridays. Yes?
My question is though, if we do that, with the PL, like if we still, does it change the instructional minutes? Like, did you calculate your instructional minutes based on Fridays?
We were
There's
17
plenty of
hours and
time.
16 hours overtime, so it won't impact it to where it would short us.
So if we keep it on Wednesdays, it's not gonna, and we move the PL days over,
It would, it's only the 2 days, right?
just
Yeah.
making sure.
I'm talking out loud, it's a good point. No, I'm talking out loud here, which I always do.
Would you lose your hour and a half? Yeah, you don't lose your hour and a half at every Wednesday though, because you were looking at it Friday, so now you're losing that extra Wednesday hour and a half every week.
Well, it's not an hour and a half,
Well,
it's an
hour,
hour
10
and
minutes,
10
whatever.
minutes. And I say that only
Is that every
because
week?
we're talking how many dates? 4?
No, every Wednesday.
No, only when the PL days fell on that day.
Oh, I see, only on those
Yeah.
PL days.
We have
that's like-
17,
Got it.
we have 17 extra hours in one of the calendars, 16 in the other. So, and that's 2 full, and then actually 7.5 hours to get a snow day, so it's a little over 2 full snow days. So we have the time to play with.
So again, I'm committed to keeping the early release on Wednesdays. That's.
Okay.
Okay, so how do people feel about that?
I agree.
I also agree. I mean, for the same rationale about the
Yeah.
consistency with the 4K, it's the same thing with this. And I think I heard Dr. Watson say that Wednesday was the ideal day, and that's what, we want to get the most out of it, and we want the
Right.
families, and I'd hate to get less out of it just because it's a little more convenient. Didn't wait for the weekend.
Well, and if we decided when we approved this that we were gonna try it for 2 years, shame on us if we pivot after a year.
I agree. I think we should only change it if we get some sort of results that it's not getting the desired effects that we want.
And that'd be part of that review coming at the end of next year. That the board originally approved to do the 2-year pilot and review at the end of 2 years. And we absolutely can support that. And that would be, you wouldn't even have to do anything. You just don't make a motion, so the motion falls off. So then it comes down to the calendar choice.
So I have a question. Another option that's here, and I know everybody wants the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Heck, I'd take the high schoolers being off because they can come help me peel potatoes for the free Thanksgiving meal, and I haven't had that for a few years, so I would like it too. But if we move that Wednesday to spring break, plus not build in 2 snow days, we have enough. And the only reason I say that is, do we have to build in snow days? If we are prepared that any snow day that happens is gonna be a virtual learning, do you have to build them in?
No, there is no rule that you have to build in snow days. My argument would only be that having kids here isn't a bad thing, like regardless if we're over the hours, but no, you do not have to. There's no requirement to build in snow days in the calendar. And what you talked about, we talked about, the committee actually brought this conversation up of saying, that Wednesday, could we move that if you took that Wednesday away, and then if you took, I believe it was the Monday after Easter, Todd, refresh my memory, one of the other folks that were here.
Yeah, you would only need to
Then we
take
could
one
plug
of them.
those in and that would,
Then you'd only have to take one of the snow days. And you could still have, and it's the Friday before because it's an in-service day, so kids have the Friday before.
what was it in that calendar that the board prefers over the full week spring break one?
The PLC days on Friday, not in the middle of the week Wednesdays. Or no.
But we already
in-service.
tabled
No,
that,
We
so that's-
already came to consensus
No, you
on
have
that.
a bunch of in-service
Yeah, the
days
terms and so the in-service days all go on Fridays.
on Wednesday,
Right.
yeah. versus
So
Wednesdays.
if we would take the calendar that Deb has up there right now, that would be the full week of spring break. And just move the January in-service day and the March in-service day
To Fridays.
Fridays.
That was what I was asking, because I think Julie, we're on the same page, like, I think that would check all the boxes for
I think
just
it
doing
would
that
too.
without taking any of those other days away. That sounds like it would check the most boxes for the board, what you were talking about with looking at a calendar, if we move those 2 days to Fridays. And then approve that full week spring break calendar. And I have a feeling that, you know, judging from feedback from staff, there were discussions around the end of the term, what that might look like, but I think knowing that the popularity of the full week spring break with staff, that I think that would be something that we could all work around as far as like Rod talked about with extending when honor roll comes out for those terms and manipulating that.
Yes,
Okay.
I mean, the calendar you have though, that doesn't have the full week, has it much, like the spread out of when a day is off for staff? Like there's a day off in each month. They have one in September, you have one in
Yeah.
October, you have one in November, December, 2 in January, 1 in February, 1 in March. I mean, so like you have, and then you go all of April and May, but you have a lot of broken out in-service days for teachers to be able to, versus, and again, all it would take is to move the one non-school day from November to spring break, get rid of the Monday after Easter in spring break, and add one of your snow days. So that's the other option.
And you're saying leave the Wednesday though, prior to Thanksgiving in that?
No, you would take, you'd have to take the Wednesday.
Okay, what I look at these two, the big difference besides the spring break is that with the full week spring break, you have 4 in-service days. The other calendar with the shortened spring break, there are 6 in-service days. So it ends up being the difference in teacher work time.
Well, no, I gotta
Teacher
clarify, that's a great
in-service.
point to bring up. So teacher contract days are 188 days. You'll note that there was a note down there, and I think I may have articulated to you about the flex days that the admin team is planning, is those flex days would be able to be days, they're gonna put in 188 contracted days, they have to. So any of those other days would be where we would utilize, like for parent-teacher conferences, those count, those hours, like, you know, in the high school right now is exploring doing 1 parent-teacher conference night per term, which makes the most sense for the high school. So if they did 3 of those, or 4 of those, 3 hours long, that would be 12 hours, so a day and a half of their 188 days. If the K-8 building did 2 sets of 2, which is what they're talking about, for 3 hours, that would be 12 hours of their time. So there's gonna be some flex time left in there that would give us the ability. A lot of times staff are doing stuff over the summer or in other periods where they come in and they're working and they're doing things and they're not being compensated, or we're paid them curriculum time, which is per diem,
It's 18, 15 hours.
right? Is that the thought was, we have these flex times, if we have teams that need to be able to meet prior to school in August or whatever, that we could have that flex day, the math team, you know, or a grade level team could get together and meet without us having to spend 18, 50 an hour to have the staff do it, that they would be able to flex that professional day to a time when it meant something for them. It was used as book study time this year. And I would argue, the principals would tell you if they were here, and Todd is laughing. I don't think staff found a lot of value in coming in at 7 in the morning and doing the book study while here, right? And the principals heard that feedback. Todd's trying to be kind. They heard that feedback, that those were flex hours. So we're talking about giving them some options to have it in large chunks. So they're gonna put in 180 days in either one of these calendars. For EAs, our hourly employees, this was something else we talked about. The calendar impacts them, student days, right? They will still work their contracted days. What it'll be is the MAT and the administrators and the EAs will pick out days on those professional learning days to have the EAs come to some of those days where it will be most applicable to helping them develop professionally. So everybody's gonna get the same contracted hours that they would have previously. It's just gonna look different how that happens within the calendar.
But I'm still confused. This one has like these 6 extra days and that one only has 3. So how is that different?
Less flex days available to staff. Is that
So
what you
all of
mean?
these in-service days staff aren't gonna be here?
No, they are. They're gonna be here. It's just the one with 6, there's gonna be less of those flex days available where they can
Got
flex
it.
hours. It's all gonna be eaten up
Got
by
it.
parent-teacher conferences. The one with less days, that I believe they're gonna have the equivalent of 3 flex days where they can put in, you know, where
Okay,
they
that
can.
makes more sense.
Yeah, sorry if I wasn't clear about that. It's all about,
Okay,
the days are the same. It's 188 days. The only difference would be in the one calendar, there's more flex days that'll be available.
okay,
And we had talked about
And
like,
there's built-in days, so there's built-in
Yep.
time for them.
Yes.
Whereas this, they have to
Okay.
carve out time elsewhere.
yep, they would kind of work with their administrator to choose times that made sense for them and when there was things that they wanted to be able to meet and collaborate on. That would include, we're still exploring what that'll look like within the contracts, but even over the summer potentially, you know, within that fiscal year, that they could, you know, they could use it to go to a conference over the summer where we wouldn't have to pay them then. They would use their flex time to go to the conference.
We'll have no trouble using up our flex time.
Correct.
I haven't
I would tell you that right now. That won't be an issue.
then I believe that the best choice may be going with the full week of spring break and switching the January and March in service from Wednesday to Friday.
So we just have to make a motion, right? Yep.
Just have more time getting their grades.
I would agree. I mean, I'm one of the, when my kids were younger, the spring break was really nice. When they're older, we don't do anything anyway because they're in extracurriculars. But I would defer to the percentage of the staff that want that. And obviously, we're into that split, and I think we should really hear that. And
I think it's a good compromise.
And the in-service days and those extra PLC days, like the 12th, and now it'll be the 19th of January, the 15th of September. Those don't have any impact on us being able to play games those nights because we don't have school, right?
No. Nope.
So that's not okay, only because that's a lot of Fridays that there's like, that we wouldn't be available to play against.
No, if you're a coach, I tell you, as an old coach, I tell you, I wasn't always enamored with Friday PL days because my players were sitting at home all day on a game night. I kind of liked them in a routine, but that being said, if you're good and practice right, and get people with discipline and self-control, it won't matter, but they would still be able to compete.
Can I ask where you're looking at the 12th?
Which 12?
They still have school that day. That's just a special day.
That's just,
the
that's-
count.
That's a count.
Oh, yeah, the
Oh,
3 days are the count
that's
days.
awesome.
That's not a professional learning day.
Oh, I
No.
thought that those
Only
were
the
the
blue days
two.
and yellow days are off.
Deb put those on there so that we wouldn't mistakenly,
Oh.
because she's like, do not have school off on those days. That would be a catastrophic error to not have kids here on the count.
Okay, so
So she
I'm
put it on.
sorry, I thought those were the 2 extra PLC days that they were building in. So the PLC days are in the in-service days?
Oh, for
Yes.
sure.
That's what those are. The blue days are the, yes.
You can go
Okay.
if you want. You can. You better ask your dad's permission first.
Yeah.
We're not done.
don't hit it here.
Yes.
Okay.
Especially right here. Especially right
Does
here.
that make it a little more?
Absolutely, so I'm sitting here like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're gonna have a Friday off, and then you're gonna have a Wednesday
No.
off, and then you're gonna have, I'm sorry,
So
I
the
thought
two-
that
the two
those were the
greens are-
PLC days.
Yeah, the 2 greens and just those days. And Deb, can you scan up once, please, for me? Todd, refresh my memory. The October, I thought we built that October day
In the
into
one-
both calendars.
No, it was just in one.
Okay, because I'll just tell you,
You're willing to give it up if you.
that's right, that's what it was. I originally wanted an October PL day, number one, because it just would make sense about that time frame. And also, I went on the Splash of Red tour this year and was like amazed by it. And then I talked to staff who have been here for decades that have never been on it. So my plan was, I was working with Lindsay, if we had a staff development day in October, is that at the end of the day, we were gonna get buses down here and take every staff member on the Splash of Red tour without the meal and stuff, is why I really wanted to have one in October to be able to do that, so.
You can do it on
Would
a
you-
Friday for your in-service, for your PLC.
Yeah, we need a little more time than that, I think she said, but yeah, that was why, so I was willing to give it up, they
So,
wanted something.
You're really only, so on the full week spring break, we're really only adding one extra in-service day during the calendar year that isn't falling at a grade transition that we've always had.
Correct,
Okay,
yes, yes.
well, then that won't be a big change from Wednesday PLC plus one more day.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, in the general scheme of things, I really don't think this is gonna be anything that's gonna cause people to be sweating bullets about it or anything at all, like
No, I think that, I would agree, that we should just move those Wednesdays to Fridays.
And the
All
other
this done.
piece, I wanna clarify this, this is the other piece we got from the data, specifically from the comments in the survey, was about not tying spring break to Easter, period.
Right.
And to try to build it in between the sports seasons. Now, Mark Denniston was on the committee, and he would tell you, there really is no week between the sports seasons. But what he said is third or fourth week in March would be a safe bet every year to say, we're gonna run spring break third or fourth week in March, not tied to Easter in the future. That was very popular in the survey and in the comments as well. And it just worked this year that Easter happened to be early, so that this fell before Easter, but the decision was very strongly like, don't tie it to Easter, just run it like
I mean,
what makes sense.
The only option is to do it over the week of boys basketball state.
Yeah.
And if we don't go to state, it is between seasons.
Yeah.
If we go to state, it isn't. I mean, it's the only time,
Yeah, track has already started then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they don't have any, so that makes it.
but at least track, the coaches let them run.
Yeah.
Because Trace went down and ran every night when we went to.
So those were the big takeaways, but I really believe both these calendars, either one that the board approves with those changes, based upon the feedback we got from staff and the community, check a lot of the boxes that people wanted, and there is no
Okay.
such thing as a perfect calendar, I can tell you. Like, this was a lot of work by a lot of people and a lot of different eyes, which was a great process. And there's just no way to get everything, these two do about as good of a job as you could probably ask for, to be structured around what's best for students, what's best for staff and professional learning, what gives families breaks periodically and staff breaks. I think these are pretty solid calendars, so I don't think you can go wrong either way.
Okay. I would like to move that we adopt the calendar with the 1 week spring break with 2 modifications. The January in-service is moved from the 17th to Friday the 19th, and the March in-service is moved from the 20th to the 22nd.
I will second that.
Any discussion?
Oh, we discussed it today.
Any more discussion?
No.
I have to ask.
No.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Good discussion.
All right. Let's go to the WASB State Convention review.
Well, now I have to see if I brought what I wanted to bring. One of the sessions I went to was on Wisconsin Business World, and I think we should do this. I think Pittsville should host a 1-day mini Business World program and invite schools from other areas.
You have my attention.
Okay, you can have that.
Okay.
The other big exciting thing, of course, was that our resolution passed unanimously.
Was there any comments?
No,
No one even got up to the,
no,
no one even got up and said anything?
no. Well, a lot of times the school that brings it up,
Yeah.
will stand up, but they were like, everybody looked just fine, so I don't think, did I say anything? Yes, I think I did say
And
something.
no one else
Say
went to the
that.
podium?
Yeah, I know, can you imagine me not saying anything?
But no one else went to the podium.
No, everyone was like, it's cool.
I've never sat through those, that every single resolution, multiple people can go to the podium.
Yeah, we had 2 resolutions, I can't remember what the other one is, and I don't care what the other one was. But I was happy with ours, and I really said to Finn, we did it. Great. So, thank you, Pam,
You're welcome.
for all of your assistance with, getting the wording correct. And I think that's the reason why it passed unanimously, because it was really clear. And, yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
What are the next steps?
The next steps, well, first of all, it's part of the WASB legislative agenda. And I personally think the next step is, since now it's a passed resolution, I think we need to start shopping it around with folks in the legislature. I would recommend we first start with our representative and senator, and also possibly talk to the chair of the Education Committee, the Assembly Education Committee is Senator Kitchens, or Representative Kitchens. I don't know who is chairing it in the Senate, but I think we should start with Nancy Van Meer and Pat Teston.
Okay. I can do that.
Because now we have association support.
And I just met with Pat a week ago,
Mhm.
and in 3 hours, he got my mental health license. That my core staff had been waiting for 60 days, and in 3 hours, he had licensing and regulation, the licenses pushed through. So he is amazing, very happy with how supportive he is in his
Yes.
office.
He's also on joint finance.
He is on
this
joint
year,
finance, and he's the chair of labor.
Which, well, yeah, that's legislative report, we're still on the WASB report, so.
Any other takeaways from the convention? Those that attended the strategic planning? Nothing new, obviously, but Fran, I did get information from Fran as a follow-up to that, that I will share with you all as far as the cost associated with doing the strategic planning piece, so we're gonna have to make a decision if we move forward with that.
So is the cost kind of high?
Don't quote me on this, but I believe it was approximately 10,000. And that would be to have, remember, we had requested to have it spaced out. A lot of that was travel and lodging costs. If we were to do it in the 2 chunks like they talked about, those costs would go down significantly, because the majority of that was the travel for the additional nights to come back for those multiple nights. So it's just something that we would have to, I planned on bringing forward next month to the board to make a decision on.
Yeah, that was a good session, but yeah, it just kind of reinforced.
I agree. And I'll take a look at this and I do need to reach out to our representatives, because we had kind of connected early on. They sent me congratulatory letters and we were gonna get together at some point, and then, you know, things happen for everybody, right? So this would be a good opportunity to connect.
Not yet.
You're at
The school board election.
the school board election.
Okay.
Now, I believe there is, so we have the paper ballots for the town of City Point and town of Findlay. And you can see Deb just brought, here's a paper copy if you guys would like to, Mary Ann.
Yeah, I know, Mary Ann, the paper person.
I'll make a motion to approve the April 4th, 2023 school board election paper ballots for the town of City Point and the town of Findlay.
I will second it.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. We'll appoint the board of canvassers.
I shouldn't make it because it's until me.
I'll make a motion to appoint Karen Gills and Mark Gar, as well as the school board clerk, to the board of canvassers.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Next is to set a date and time for the board of canvassers. which is traditionally the Wednesday after, so Wednesday, April 5th, 2023 at 1 p.m. in the administrative conference room.
Julie, does that work for you? If not, I believe we're gonna have to appoint an alternate, correct? Yep.
It needs to be at 1 in the middle of the day, not 3.
Yeah, that's an early release day, so Mark Dar is a bus driver, and that gets him out of there in time to rent the bus.
Does that work?
No motion required on that.
Yeah, I think it would.
Okay, so now we'll move to legislative report.
The governor has his budget address coming up, and it is usually covered online on Wisconsin Eye. It's going to be on Wednesday, February 15th. So we'll see what he proposes for education. The initial thoughts are that it's going to be a big increase, is what he's going to propose. Okay. Otherwise, I think there would be value in having a meeting with both Representative Vandermeer and Senator Tustin. I'm wondering how the board could be involved in that, if the board wants to be involved in that. I do believe there's real value in having relationships with legislators. They work for us. And Jason, as the CEO, needs to have a real good relationship, but they need to know who we are too. So I don't know what thoughts are on that.
I don't think there would be anything that would prevent the board from, as long as we were not in a quorum and, so if there were representatives from the board, if the board chose, like if there were two, when we set the meeting with 2 board members and myself, we wouldn't have to worry about public posting and any quorum issues. That would be my thoughts on its face. And then we could come back and report to the rest of the board.
That would be good.
If it's helpful, I'm more than, I know both of them, meet with both of them. As regularly as you meet with them, right? So I'd be more than happy.
And I would prefer not to, because I meet with them regularly. I'm going to see Justin tomorrow, just like you saw last week. And I really think that other folks need to have that opportunity.
I'd be able to do it. It's have to be a weekday, but.
Yeah. Well, usually Mondays and Fridays. That's when you're gonna meet with them, because they're usually busy with state business on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
Why don't I send out some feelers to both of them and see what might be available, and I'll coordinate with the board and see if we can come down from the tour and
I think that would be
sit
great.
down.
I know
I'd love to have
Nancy's
us
got a
here.
tour.
I'm sure they've seen our CT facility, I would assume.
Not out of Tustin,
Okay.
yeah. I think Nancy has.
Okay.
It's
It's nice enough to visit twice.
It is, absolutely.
Any other legislative stuff?
I don't have anything else.
No,
Okay, any public comments, Deb? Okay, I will entertain a motion to move into closed session for Wisconsin State Statute 19.851C.
Make the motion to go to closed session.
One second.
Roll call vote, please, James.
Chris?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Julie? Yes.
we are in closed.
It's dedication.
did anybody want to take?
That's what the resolution was that passed.
Well, she already went into closed, you can't do it now. Unless we all go in.
So, family